Monsters, creatures, legends. You know them. You slay them. But do you ever get to play them? Sure, defeating a giant in single combat, solving a sphinx's riddle, or even outwitting a devil is a lot of fun. But what if you were the giant, sphinx, or devil? What if you could become the monster? Well, now you can. Continuing the tradition of Year of Monsters, Roll for Combat is proud to present the Year of Legends. Every month, you'll receive a new legendary creature that you can play as a character for either 5e or Pathfinder. Now you too can play as a fallen angel, a stony gargoyle, a brain-eating seraphage, an ocular evil eye, a towering giant, a teeming swarmblood, a moon-blessed were-creature, a tree-like arboreal, a miraculous golemborn, an accursed lamia, an ominous psychopomp, or a riddling sphinx. You can get all this for less than a cup of coffee every month. But don't delay. If you back the Year of Legends Kickstarter now, you'll receive Devils, a bonus 13th ancestry at the start of the new year. These infernal creatures from hell are the perfect complement to January's other ancestry, Angels. If you back the Kickstarter today, you'll receive both Devils and Angels to kick off 2024. Otherwise, you'll have to wait until 2025 for the Devils to appear. So, won't you give monster characters a chance? Back the Year of Legends today.
Oh, we're here.
Hello, everybody.
We're here with Jess. Once again, we had to repeat.
Yep.
Because, well, think of it as we had so much fun with Jess that we had to bring her back.
I think in this case, Jess offered multiple days at the beginning, and then we gave it to her. Whereas with Derek, we brought Derek back afterwards because some other people couldn't make it.
That's right. And then yesterday, it was just us. And actually, more to say than I thought I would. But
it was actually a good back and forth because you had so many different rogue players that we were able to analyze. And I learned a lot about one of your rogue players. Which one is that? Is that John?
Yes.
I learned a lot about John, and I'm gonna ask today in I think in which there's one that we can try to figure out if it's the one that John would take out of the witch patrons, because I think it might be.
Well, I have
based
a witch. I have a witch
based on learning about John.
I have a witch as well, but
but it's not John's witch, so they might not have that patron.
No,
also,
they do a couple. They're a little different though, because they do heavy crossovers. But I will say the witch is my favorite iconic. What's her name?
Bea, which is like kind of based on the Spanish word that sounds similar, maybe an unfortunate name, but is a really awesome iconic. I love her fox Dachi.
Oh, she's the best one. She looks great. She's got her fox. She's always like wicked looking. Like she's great. She's my favorite one. In fact, the Eldamon trainer avatar that we have is loosely based on her.
Oh, interesting.
Loosely. Because I was like, oh, I kind of like the way she looks. Well, the hair is similar. She has like the bump in the hair and stuff. So.
I have to say, when you were saying your witch does heavy crossovers, I thought you were going to say heavy crossbows, like had a heavy crossbow she fires and then drops the weapon because it's so much to reload or something like that. But
they have a lot of I think it's sorcerer. Once again, it's like everyone, because if you want to have spells, you cross over to sorcerer, and that's how you get all the spells. So it seems pretty common.
Well, now which is going to be the archetype everyone crosses over into, unless it's psychic, because there's a variety of reasons that many of the new things for which are extremely dippable and are not protected against from multi-class in a way that other classes do. So, while also the multi-class archetype that was already better than all the other ones that were in here was made even more powerful and I'm not sure why. So we'll get to that later on when we get deeper into the witch, but there's some very interesting options that present themselves.
Yeah. It's funny, I don't know anyone who plays wizard, because I think, strangely, because there's so much flexibility in Pathfinder with the archetypes and cross-classing,
Multi-classing, maybe?
I like cross-classing, but multi-classing, that you could just figure it out. Like, you don't need to have, the best thing about the wizard was like a flexibility, but I feel like there's so much flexibility in Pathfinder that you can do it just through class builds instead of having to take the wizard. So I still haven't met a single person who played a wizard yet. Not one.
Oh, I have a wizard in my Strength of Thousands game.
As I said, I've never met anyone.
Well, I had a wizard in my War for the Crown game right after the playtest was over and PF2 was actually ready to play. Constantly the MVP.
Yeah.
Not every fight, but over the course of sessions, whenever there was something that was like, this was the best thing that anybody ever did during this entire dungeon, it was always the wizard. Every time. And he always got people out of a bind with utility too. But there was one time they were in Norgorber's domain or something like that, and this ridiculous incorporeal creature was about to leave the room where it was losing the fight to go aggro another fight and recover and come back at them later. And the wizard just okay, yeah, I disintegrate the floor that it went down into. And the PCs fell down into the other encounter that was about to aggro, but then the wizard featherfalled them all, and then the other PC went next and killed the incorporeal creature before it could do anything else. And then that was out. It couldn't aggro the rest of the dungeon. And then they fought the other things that they'd fallen down into, who were all surprised that a bunch of PCs just fell down into them from a disintegrate. And the wizard was always doing stuff like that.
So, real quick.
That's classic wizard.
A few things. First of all, when we get 100 likes, what's Jess going to sing?
No, I don't sing.
Jess doesn't sing, Jess mimes, remember?
As I said, when we get 100 likes, what's Jess going to sing? Doesn't matter if you can sing or not.
You truly do not want me to sing.
We've been hearing everyone else sing.
I am very tone deaf. I will not be singing on your stream.
Better. The worse you are,
it's
the better.
Not better. It's not better, and I will not be doing it.
How about we have Jess mime on my own?
No, mime. Well,
mime on my own. That would be funny.
Or see it. It has to be something that people can hear. So if it's not singing, then what is it? Something.
What about a tone poem, Steven?
I don't know. She can think about it while we get to the 100 likes. It can't be a mime. It has to be something.
I agree with Math Guy Dave that you're probably better than Steven and me, but I also don't approve of forcing someone who really doesn't want to sing.
That's fine, but we should.
Math Guy Dave, I am not as good as Mark and Steven. That will not occur.
Copacabana. Everyone can sing Copacabana.
It simply will not occur.
It's so easy. All right, you can do spoken word. How about that? That's not even singing. That's just talking. You're doing that now.
Yeah, we shall see.
Talking word, spoken word. You can rap. There you go.
Or do write a favorite poem.
Haiku. Look up a haiku. We'll have you do haiku. Come on, that you can do.
I could potentially
do a haiku about elementals.
Yeah.
A haiku is easy.
We'll see.
Anyone can do haiku.
See.
That's another big thing for today. RPG Superstar Elemental Storm just had the winners announced.
Yeah, that is
literally true. A couple hours ago. It came out.
10 months later.
Yeah, the grand prize was Autumnal, which is an autumn fae.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole bunch of really cool things. So we can do a haiku about elements.
Yeah, if you go there, you can see all the winners. It takes a long time, that contest, but we take our time, and I know it takes long. But you know why? Because it had to go through. First, we gave a lot of time for people to submit. Then we gave a lot of time for voting. And then we had a lot of time for judging. And judges actually got done ahead of time, which never happens before, ever. I was kind of surprised how quickly judging went. So, and for those who are listening, I do want you to do keep in mind we do look at all the judging and the judging scores, both public and private, but then we do review every single monster. So, like, if your scores, not that this ever happened, but like if the scores were really low and the monster we felt was really good, it might go to gold, or platinum, even
That's
though
never happened before
never
or
happened.
even been remotely close to
it's
happening.
never happened.
But
It's never happened.
theoretically could.
It
I
could
guess.
happen. That's what my point is.
I don't think that we would override the judges if they were really low, but if it was like medium and very good, which actually still hasn't happened, I could see it because, Steven, you're the host, so you're essentially an additional score that isn't listed on there.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like we look at them and keep in mind we see so many monsters, you can tell pretty quick where they are. And if anything, the judges really help more for the tiers, like between the silver and copper or silver and gold.
That's what judges are here for, to distinguish among already elite entries, like which ones are like the best of the best.
Right.
Which ones are just about ready to publish.
Right. And that's really, for what it's worth, if people feel like, oh, if I only got a score of a 9 instead of a 5, I would have been, it's like, probably not. It probably would have, there's a lot of scoring and it's not one judge. So keep that in mind.
Brian King says unmasked judge number 4. The judges don't actually have like assigned judge numbers.
It's randomized each time.
Randomized.
Exactly. It's randomized each time. So like, if I judged a monster, I might be listed as like judge number 2 on one monster and judge number 4 on a different one. It'll be randomized which one I am on any creature that I judged. And that goes for the other judges as well.
That's right. Yep. Ryan King knows that because I saw him say that he did that in the Discord, but is joking because there's a meme about Judge 4 being like the White Heart Eldamon Hidgwin, which we're going to be showing on in a few weeks as the Eldamon of the week, I think in 2 weeks from now. Right. Like that it's a mysterious white stag that just sort of comes in and leaves mysterious things with no comment and then moves on.
That's quite good.
Two people had that, even though it was a different Judge 4, and then they decided that this mysterious white heart was Judge 4, and so it's become a mini meme over the past few hours.
Yeah.
And the other thing is there's more than 4 judges, so everyone has judges 1 through 3 or 4. But there's like 10 judges, so the numbers don't line up to anything. So keep that in mind. We've been doing this for a little while. I made sure it was as anonymous as possible, and the judges had no idea what anyone else has done, and it's all siloed. Like they literally go in, they look at the monsters, they judge. That's it. That's all they get to say.
And the great thing about it is that the different judges have very different perspectives. So you'll see things from multiple viewpoints. And it's not groupthink, and you'll get to see the pros, the cons, all different perspectives and all different priorities.
And then before we get into it, let's go through the spiel. It's the weekly spiel.
Daily spiel.
The daily spiel. Well, we're almost done. I mean, can't believe we're already here. We're up to Witch. And November 8th today seemed like such a long time ago when we made this graphic. I was like, oh my God, it's going to practically be Thanksgiving. Well, what do you know? It's almost Thanksgiving. Witch today. Tomorrow's the Wizard.
With Anto.
Anto really wanted to do the Wizard. He's like, I love the Wizard. I want to do the Wizard. So I'm like, okay.
I'm really looking forward to talking about it with Anto because the Wizard is a fascinating case study in a class that like has these issues with it, but in a way that is different than people might think.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. Anyone who doesn't, I know this is the Witch episode, but it's very interesting to me the people who say that like the new wizard schools take away options for what to put in your school slot, because it's very clear to me that those people have never attempted over a campaign that goes like all the way up to getting your 9th level spells, attempted to play a diviner or an illusionist.
And the big one is on Friday. We have Ronald the Rules Lawyer, who it's funny, we used to talk to him a lot.
Because he was free on Tuesdays and not Wednesdays, and we moved to Wednesday, and then he was suddenly not free as a guest.
I'm talking about even before his channel blew up. He and I used to talk all the time, and he would chat with us. And then,
I think the big point where he skyrocketed in views was actually he was watching one of our shows and did a very well done clip episode that summarized it. And during the OGL crisis,
he was writing us quite a bit.
He's a friend of the show for sure. He just isn't free on Wednesdays.
That's true. And then he will go through that. I got to go through GM Core myself. I haven't looked at it that closely, but I will, since I'm the GM. So I should look at that. And then, of course,
you're the eternal GM.
I am the eternal GM. Up, and we got Derek on here. We never get Derek and Jess together. We never get Derek and Jess ever. One day we got to get.
It would be a good dynamic for an episode, I think.
It's in my contract that I won't do episodes with Derek.
Derek, you free?
Well, there you go,
Let me know if you're free. I'll get you on right now. I want to see the sparks fly.
Oh no.
Oh baby. And then of course, how often do you have two guests at the same time? Not that frequently, but it happens. I have the layout. I have the layout ready. I can.
He has the technology.
I do. And then don't forget the year. He's not free. Because he's conveniently never free when Jess is free. Maybe they're the same person.
It's possible.
I mean, have you ever seen us both in the same place at the same time, Stephen? I asked, knowing full well that you have.
Yes, I was like at Gen
I don't
Con,
know.
I saw you literally standing next to him. I think I even have a picture with you guys.
I don't know. They might be the same person. Here's my proof. Derek is very strident about his ratings of things, but when Jess came in, it was like, maybe you should think of the dandy in a different way because it's very it's not just for flavor. It also has some powerful mechanical effects, and Derek changed his mind. Could that have been possible if it wasn't just himself with a sock puppet account called Jess who convinced him to change his mind for a performative reason? I don't know.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Anyhow, here we are. Animated tokens, Year of Legends. Check it out. Just go to kickstarter.rollforcommon.com or Year of Legends. We got so many cool new tokens, and look at them.
We're so close to Storm Giant.
I know. It's like we just I think everyone backed it who likes us. So
I think everyone who's watching these episodes has either backed it or they know that they can't by this point. And I really appreciate that. So everyone in chat who's already backed us, I appreciate you.
Yeah, I do. I do appreciate you. But we're so close to cool new things, but just need a few more backers, just a tiny bit more. This happens though. There's always like a hump you have to get over in any Kickstarter. It's like it always happens. Like you just get stuck, and then all of a sudden it like blows up. Again, it's weird. It happens every time. So right now we're at this like the hump, but it'll break through.
I mean, the hump is just a thing. We actually would did a lot better on not hitting the hump than any of our other Kickstarters in terms of like having good momentum and not a hump early on. So I think it'll break through, and we'll definitely get the Storm Giant. And I think we have a good chance of getting the one after that too. So we'll see what happens.
I expect to get at least the next two, and if not,
we'll see what happens.
Yell it.
Looking forward to it.
Anyhow,
so are we ready for witches, Stephen? Or I think we talked about what will happen if we hit 100
questions. Like, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Make sure you get any questions in if you got questions, and super chats will always be answered, and your other questions will be answered if we like you. I mean, if we see them.
We'll answer them if we can or if they fit in. And if I see that it's about something that I have later on our docket, I will try to slot it in for that point in time.
There you go. All right, now you guys talk about witch, and I'll just sit here.
All right, and Stephen, you said you had a witch.
I actually can talk
I'm going to intentionally bring you in at one point to see if I can correctly guess about which one John would have taken if he could pick one of the new patrons.
He wouldn't take a witch. Derek says we tried to make him a spellcaster, and he did not like it.
Derek says, "Welcome to the Resentment meta," and Derek, I am intending not to spend a lot of time talking about the Resentment because every other YouTuber and like many people who read it have already noted the game warpingness of that. And I feel like there's probably already thoughts going on about changes for it, and it's eclipsing some really, really cool design and like flavorful stuff in the other patrons. So we'll mention it, but I don't want us to be like constantly talking about it because everybody already is. There's plenty of places you can see about it. And I don't disagree that, like, yes, if you design something that stuns only during your own turn or something like that, and it'll turn into a perma stun. Yeah, there's all sorts of things. Let's get through this though. So we've got the witch class and we've got the witch chassis of different abilities in the class features. When we're looking at the class features, many of them remain the same, even though there were a lot of changes in the witch overall. It was mostly not in the creatures. Hex spells at first level has a change. Now, instead of just being able to gain phase familiar, you can instead choose the Patron's Puppet option, which is more of a proactive than a defensive ability, allowing you to, for a free action, command your familiar for 1 focus point. This will be very important in some of the later feats that are super strong and they move from super strong to super duper 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 strong when you can do them as a free action instead of 1 action. So worth noting. Now here's the good fun one. The usual OGL changes, lightning reflexes to reflex expertise and alertness to perception expertise. But magical fortitude stayed and did not change to fortitude expertise, which makes it one of the few classes that did not get fortitude expertise. So it was like almost standardized, but wasn't there. I mean, it's not that fun, but it's a name change. No mechanics were changed in the making of this. Resolve was changed to will of the pupil, so it's another example of resolve getting removed. So those are some of the big changes to the class features. The only other thing that was changed in the class features is an enormous change where the patrons were just like entirely, completely revamped. And we have an entire 2-page spread of this that I'm not sure if we're going to show you or not, but if we do, then it will show you that the patrons were completely revamped. So all of them gain new names, which are really cool names that not only are evocative, but they fit in with the previous patron theme, and they often fit in like very neatly with the name of the focus cantrip. So like, for example, like you might not necessarily need the fervor patron to be called Faith's Flamekeeper if you didn't know that the name of the cantrip was Stoke the Heart. So it's almost like they were so neatly fit in that it was almost like it was there all along. Because of course a Flamekeeper wants to stoke your heart, of Faith's Flamekeeper. So they're very, very evocative names that fit great with the cantrips, in my opinion. So they were changed to gain 1 static familiar ability that is unique to them. And then, of course, the focus cantrips had some significant changes to them as well. So I'm going to go through them one by one. And Jess, I'll like to hear your reaction to these. I figure you probably didn't have that many reactions to the renamings of the saving throws. But if you did, let me know before I go into this.
No, the renamings of the saving throws, no. I have no particular reaction. We have a question in chat asking what about the Mosquito Witch? And Baba Yaga and Mosquito Witch were both not in the APG where the core witch class was. Right. Those were in Lost Omens books. And so it's not surprising to me that we're not seeing them here. But I will also note that Baba Yaga and Mosquito Witch were also not like patron theme groups in the same way that like Fervor Patron or Night Patron were like themes rather than like an evocative entity. Mosquito Witch is an entity. Baba Yaga is an entity. So if anything, Baba Yaga and Mosquito Witch thematically fit in better with the way that the new themes or the new patrons are like flavored than they fit in with the way that the old patrons were flavored. And it wouldn't surprise me to see like an errata for doing Mosquito Witch in a way that aligns more with the mechanics of the new patrons, but I would have been shocked to have seen Mosquito Witch in player core.
Yeah, there's no way.
Because it wasn't in APG. It was in a Lost Omens book.
That was not the purview of this. So anytime I talk about something being added or subtracted, I'm always going to assume that core rulebook plus advanced player's guide being smushed together is the default. So if I'm like, this feat is gone, that means that it was in one of those two books and was removed. Like last episode when the rogue lost a feat, it was in one of those two books. And Mosquito Witch was in Monsters of Myth, and Baba Yaga is in Lost Omens Legends. Now, there is one Pact that was in Dark Archive that is not specific and is also not in here because it's only Advanced Player's Guide plus Core Rulebook. So it has all of the Advanced Player's Guide plus Core Rulebook patrons are here in a new form. Not a one of them was removed, but there are major changes that have been made to all of them. And I'm going to go through them in order based on their previous name that you are familiar with from the Advanced Player's Guide, which happens to mean I'm going to do Curse first, which became the Resentment, so that we can get it over with. Yeah. So Curse was renamed as the Resentment. So Evil Eye was changed from Frightened to Sickened. This is not only much, much, much more powerful than it was before, especially since, like many of them, it does not have a lockout for becoming temporarily immune, and you can do it again. That was changed, but it's also an anti-synergy with its own sustain effect. When you're frightened, you're going to go. When you're frightened 1, it's going to go away at the end of the next turn. So the sustain effect of Evil Eye in the original was that it wouldn't go away because you spent actions to just keep them frightened 1 forever. It makes it kind of similar to like a 1-target Dirge of Doom. Sickened is not similar at all in how it works because Sickened just stays forever until the enemy spends an action to maybe remove it. So while Evil Eye's effect for sustain is unchanged, that they can't spend an action to make it go below 1, it's a very weird anti-synergy because with Frightened, it's like, oh, great, I can spend an action and now this Frightened, which would have gone away, stays. But Sickened is so powerful that you never basically, like, it is like literally a trap to spend your own action to make it so that the enemy does not spend their action to maybe remove your Sickened that you can just put back next turn by spending an action. So, like, you can, like, you're mortgaging your next. If you don't do it, you can just spend the action next turn anyway, at worst. And at best, they spent the action and didn't remove things. So it's a little weird that it works like that, but it is much more powerful than it was before. That's not the thing people were talking about. If you're like, were people talking about the Resentment? They were talking about the new familiar ability. So every familiar, like I said, gained a new static ability. All of them do something whenever you cast or sustain a hex. It's usually based on the familiar being some distance from a target, either an ally or an enemy. And many of them are flavorful, cool, balanced, and offer a new playstyle for your familiar. This is not all of those things. The Resentment automatically extends all conditions that are on an opponent within 15 feet. As many people have mentioned, this is a game warping ability because the condition that is on them might be balanced to only last until the very end of your turn, to be like, they can't act right now while I'm acting. And it has no save. There's nothing that can stop it. If you can get them paralyzed or something like that for a very short time, they just are forever. So, do you have anything else to say about that one, Jess, before we move on and talk about some of the flavorful ones that are not the big power meta one?
Yeah, I mean, the things that people have said about the familiar of ongoing misery ability on that familiar, they are true things. The way that this interacts with spells like slow, that correct observations.
Yep. I would call this the most Pathfinder 1 thing that I've seen in Pathfinder 2 Remaster, maybe in all of Pathfinder 2, and that Pathfinder 1 was replete with abilities like that. If anything, it makes me feel like the Pathfinder 1 Witch in a way. Because the Pathfinder 1 Witch often had scenarios where the rest of the party is like, what is even happening? Where they did something and then the fight was over. And so, like, it does go back to its roots, I guess. Let's talk about the other ones, though, because they're cool. Yeah. And if this wasn't here, people would all be talking about them because there's so many fun things to do with them. So Fate became Spinner of Threads. Just an awesome name for a Fate patron.
Mm-hmm.
So the Nudge Fate ability is now no longer sustained and has no temporary immunity, meaning it can and should be spammed at all times outside of combat. It doesn't even fatigue you because it's like one action out of every minute to do it. So it doesn't even have to be your exploration activity. You just keep putting it up on somebody all the time and you're set. The Static Familiar ability is a +1 or -1 status to AC when you cast or sustain a hex. This is great. It's a fun bonus, offensive or defensive, whichever one you need in the situation. And the defensive one doesn't force you to put your familiar up and close and personal with the enemy because they just need to be near like you or an ally. So it's very flexible and I like it a lot. What do you think about Fate?
I agree that the playstyle of keeping your familiar close to allies or close to yourself is perhaps a lot more intuitive and in line with the way that most people do already play their familiars. So being able to maintain that playstyle and give an ally a +1 status bonus to AC is good and safe, but it is a status bonus, so it's not going to stack with other status bonus, which incentivizes you to send it out close to an enemy. Like, for example, if your familiar were with your fighter, then you would have the choice of either boosting the fighter's AC on any round where your fighter would actually benefit from a status bonus to AC, or giving a penalty to whatever enemy the fighter is engaged with. And that would be a way for maybe your fighter to protect the familiar while it's also has the ability to do either of its effects, which I like that. I like that. Nudge Fate also, I like it. It's cool.
Yeah, it's useful. It just it gets underlooked because of other options that are out there, but I always find another +1 right when I need it to be a good thing.
Yeah.
So next up is Fervor. It became Faith's Flamekeepers, I mentioned earlier as an example of some of the awesome names. So Stoke the Heart lost the temporary immunity clause, which means now there's less point than there was before in sustaining it versus recasting. They're mostly similar, but there are still a few reasons to do it. One is that you can sustain it and cast another hex if you don't want to cast a 2-action spell that turn. 2 is there ways to sustain with effortless concentration or like the cackle feat that you wouldn't be able to use to get a free recast, but you could use to get a free sustain. But it's mostly the same as it was before because you could have just sustained it. There's just less pressure to sustain it. It's a little quality of life improvement. The Static Familiar ability gives you temporary HP to somebody that is close by. This can add a bit of survivability alongside the Focus Cantrip's offensive boost, which is nice for be like not just make them a glass cannon, just more damage and take some temporary hit points.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I like the way that the temporary hit point boost combines with the damage boost, like you said, that it allows you to do both.
Yeah, it feels good for a divine too. It's very on point, very in theme.
Yeah.
So the Knight became Starless Shadow. So it used to be a kind of like trying to be like, Knight, some people always characterize darkness and night as evil, but the Night Patron used to be kind of more neutral. It was just about being dark. This one kind of got to be the creepy evil Night version because it learns fear instead of sleep, which admittedly stops it from doubling up on the Lesson of Dreams.
Yeah.
And, which is useful. That's good because you probably want the Lesson of Dreams and then you would just learn the same spell twice. The Shroud of Night makes it explicit that you can treat bright light as dim light, whereas before it was implied that you could because it said you might want to put it on your allies with light blindness, but it didn't actually say that it helped your allies with light blindness in any way, which is an oopsie that was fixed in the remaster. Thank you, remaster. And now it also makes things concealed to the target unless they have greater dark vision instead of dark vision, which makes it maybe not as good for your light blindness allies if they don't have greater dark vision anymore, because it's like, well, you're not light blindness, but you are also, everything's also concealed to you. Still, it's good that it actually works for them and they can try to get greater dark vision. As usual, there's no temporary immunity here, but I will call that out because some hexes did keep temporary immunity. The Static Familiar ability is pretty cool. It gives Frightened 1 automatically when casting or sustaining a hex, but The familiar must be completely adjacent to the person that gets frightened, and it must be concealed, hidden, or undetected to that target. So if you use your Shroud of Night, that will do it. But it's hard to set up and particularly dangerous because adjacent compared to 15 feet is a big difference.
Yeah, having the familiar adjacent to an enemy is much more dangerous for the familiar, but it only works if your familiar is concealed, hidden, or undetected. And so the fact that the familiar is concealed, hidden, or undetected does offer it the safety of not being perceived by the creature that it's affecting. And that's something.
Yeah. And in our make-believe world that we're going to be using here, where we're kind of comparing and contrasting all of them while pretending that we don't see the resentment, I still think this is a very solid option, but it's situational because it's hard to set up. It's a high risk, high reward. If you have the right setup for this and if you have other teammates who can help make sure they get concealed or some other ability that's going to get concealed up all the time, or even hidden. It's just like, yeah, sure, my familiar is next to you, but you can't see it. You have a 50% chance to miss. So it could actually even almost be tanking if it's hidden and they decide, well, I'm going to attack it. It's like, okay, sure. Sure. But with a 50% miss chance, we'll see how you do.
Yeah, so I think there are definitely like groups, like party compositions, where you would be able to get a lot of mileage out of this. And I feel like compared to some of the other ones, like especially compared to Fate's Flamekeeper. Like Fate's Flamekeeper, boosts to damage, boosts to temporary hit points. Those are useful for like anyone, any party. Whereas Starless Shadow's Hex is not necessarily useful to all parties in the same way.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So
it depends on your party and it depends on your enemies. Because if you're fading all Grid or Dark Vision foes, it's like we're beating back the Caligny invasion, and it's like, well, my Hex cantrip is not going to do anything, or the Devils.
Yeah, the Hex and the familiar ability that you get when you do a Hex synergize with each other and are likely to work in similar situations and are likely to not work in similar situations. So true. I think they make sense together, and I think the patron as a whole is cohesive and makes sense as a package, but it's not a package that you're always going to want.
It's highly thematic. It's highly thematic. It's well designed, but you're right that it's not a universal must take. Yeah, it'll depend on your situation. Yeah. So,
but I like that. I like that. The like auto frightened is on something that is so kind of niche.
Yeah. And it's fun because also if you have another hex, even if it's not the starting hex, you just have some other hex you're going to do on them, you can throw an auto frightened onto them too. And I have to check the timing on this for a second. So let me look at this one real quickly. What is the timing of when that frightened happens? Is it only like after you cast the spell? It's when you cast the spell. So the timing is actually a little ambiguous, but if you assume that it's when you cast the spell, but before you apply the effects, because it doesn't say after you cast the spell, that could mean that you're giving them a -1 on their save against the hex. So you do that before like Curse of Death. Be like, here, take a -1. Now eat Curse of Death. So that lines up with my reading of it. It says when you cast a hex. I think so too. That was my thought.
I would yeah, exactly. If this were like a reaction triggering when you cast a hex or sustain a hex, I would read that as
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So next one up is Rune. It became the Inscribed One. There are literally no changes to Discern Secrets, as far as I can tell. The static familiar ability has a very evocative visual. It basically makes its letters shift around and distract your foes, basically allowing it to flank as if it had a 5-foot reach after casting or sustaining it.
Oh.
Great visual, very thematic, even though it's not necessarily expected for like the inscribed writing one. But I feel that even in our world where we're ignoring the resentment, that the danger to your familiars probably outweighs the benefit due to the fact that there's so many other ways to get off guard.
Yeah. It depends on your party composition, though.
For sure.
If you have a party where there is someone who like frequently doesn't have someone to flank with, or like you're building your party and someone wants to play a rogue and they want to be in flanking, but it's unlikely that they will frequently have someone who they can like reliably flank with for whatever reason. Like maybe you have I don't know, like a ranged champion or something.
You might.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. So we're on the same wavelength there. I was going to say the main use for it would be you've got a rogue. They are literally the only melee. There's no one else. And you want your familiar to do it. But I find that also to be like a very unsteady equilibrium where I feel very unsafe about both of those two creatures unless you have something that's obscene at keeping other creatures up, like a wood kineticist spamming the tree, or like a life elemental avatar spamming temporary hit points on you, or something like that.
Yeah.
A dedicated cleric who's also got some preventative measures. Even then, I think that, I mean, actually, in that one case, this is like the best one, because in the case where you've got a rogue who can't get off guard and they did not take any of the other rogue feats to get off guard, well,
or just the structure of their turn and the way that they want to spend their actions on a turn, it's best for them if they have flanking. Yeah.
You still maybe would rather have Starless Shadow and then they take Dread Striker, where Frightened makes the enemy be off guard. Maybe, but maybe you're fighting enemies that are greater dark vision and you want to make sure they're always going to be flanked. It's cool. And I just think it's a little risky for your familiar for what you get. Just because it's a condition that's easy to apply otherwise. But Jess, you're absolutely right that there's some cases where this is the right one for you.
Yeah.
So
this is another one where it's going to depend a lot on your overall party composition. You would want to be making a decision about this familiar because it fits in well with what everybody else wants to do.
Which is a bit of a shame, given that it's like the arcane one. So it's like, if you want to be an arcane witch, this is what you will be. Yeah. But that is all right. I like it anyway. It's just not as useful universally as some of the other ones. So Wild became the Wilding Steward. Now you can target anyone with your ability to sicken them when they damage you, not just animals, plants, and fungi. Animals, plants, and fungi take a -1. There's no temporary immunity, so you can use it every turn until they eventually get to the point where damaging you sickens them. The static familiar ability gives you your choice of imprecise sense, tremor sense, or wave sense out to 60 feet on your familiar when you cast or sustain a hex, and it can use a free action to point out. Like the familiar just kind of points out something that they noticed, like their little paw with their little paw or whatever tentacle, whatever they have. And I think John Stevens, rogue player, would take this, because in the situation where the enemy is invisible and you don't know where they are and you're in a bad spot, this familiar has your back. And John seems to take options that are like, in case I'm stuck underwater, I've got it. Or like, if I'm fighting something that's invisible, I've got it. So I think this is the one that's like, I want to make sure I avoid the worst case scenario rather than the one that's like, I want to try to create the best case scenario.
I like this a lot.
Yeah, he'd probably take it. He likes to take the situational things where if you're in a really bad spot, you got an out. Invisibility, flying. Actually, they have a saying. It's if you fly, you die. That's what they always say. So that's wherever you see someone flying, they're like, take them out, get rid of the flyers, because they never have flying. So
there you go.
Flying's also so slow, unless you. It looks cool, but it's a very slow ability because you got to hover every turn. So.
It's true.
Yeah. The thing that I like most about familiar keen senses is that it says that your familiar can immediately point out as a free action. I like that a lot.
Yeah,
And
it's really cool.
this isn't only useful in situations where the familiar needs tremor sense or wave sense in order to detect an enemy. This is useful in any situation where you would need to point out an enemy, which could be a lot of situations, and it can be very challenging to fit in spending an action on point out if you want to do a lot of other things. And so this gives you the it combines spending one action on casting or sustaining a hex with, like, you get point out as a freebie. And on top of point out as a freebie, you also get all these additional senses that maybe you need, maybe you don't. I like it a lot.
Yeah. I think it's very, very slick, very cool. It fits together well with the theme of the Wilding Steward. It's great. It's a good choice
Also,
for Primal, which previously, the original one was a little kind of niche because you could either use it or you couldn't.
Use it or lose
And
it.
then also Wilding Words has it imparts penalties on enemies even on the success.
Yep.
And on the failure, they become sickened when they damage you.
Which is pretty
As
sweet.
as we have covered in our discussions of other patrons, sickened is a pretty great condition to put on an enemy.
Yes. It's more or less worse than Evil Eye because they have to then also damage you. But on the other hand, if you're assuming that your victory condition is to not have the entire party killed, and the enemy's victory condition is to kill everyone in the party, eventually they do have to kill you before they have done this. So eventually they will take the sicken.
Yes.
And if
I think it's not an uncommon enemy strategy to, like, go after squishy casters first. But when you have this hex up, if the enemy is like, okay, so I could go after this squishy caster and they have kind of a low AC, so I probably will hit them. However, if I do choose this course of action, I am disincentivized from doing this first because it will sicken me.
Yep. The psychological benefit is real. And sometimes it's even actually better for you to have them not attack you and not get sickened because it protects you from being attacked and gets your really highly defended character to be attacked. That's one thing I really like about it. I even like that about the original. The problem was it could only be used on certain types of creatures. So it's very cool and I like it a lot. And this is
likes. Oh, we still need another 40 likes to hear haiku from you.
Or whatever. We'll see.
Or, whatever Jess decides to do.
I'll do a dramatic reading of something.
There you go. Even
there
better.
You go.
Dramatic
That's
reading.
Better. I love dramatic readings.
And let me tell
Some people just watch YouTube videos of dramatic readings.
That's right. In fact, channel.
You know what?
Channel your character from Gen Con. What were you playing, by the way? Were you a vampire?
Oh, okay. So in the World of Darkness LARP that I was doing at Gen Con, I was playing a Puka changeling. And this character was Nadine Holiday, the heiress to the Holiday Inn fortune.
There you go. Just channel her.
And so the voice that this character definitely did
don't
not
give it all away for free. Don't give it all away for free.
Because the biggest drawback of the Pukas is definitely not anything that is related to your ability to, like, say things that are true and / are accurate.
Say you got it for free. Didn't even have to get to 100 likes.
So this definitely was not the voice. But no, I will not be doing a dramatic reading in that voice.
Okay. There we go.
I was like, we'll never
do it in a different voice.
That voice
is a little slow for a dramatic reading.
Way too slow.
Exactly.
That's the slowest voice. I think you won the LARP because people were like, "Oh my God, just give it to her. She won't stop talking. It's gonna take 20 hours for us to hear
that character is now your queen. If you are in the courts of the Fae.
I'm not.
Yes, that character became the Winter Queen. So the Unseelie Court successfully won the return to the split rulership, where the Seelie Court rules in the summer and the Unseelie rules in the winter. The meta that Changeling the Dreaming starts with is that the Seelie Court has refused to give up rulership for like a long time, and it's a problem.
Got it.
I mean, it's a problem according to the Unseelie. It's not a problem according to the Seelie.
The problem according to Garb. All right.
So, speaking of the Winter Court, Winter Patron became the Silence in Snow. So the Clinging Ice X cantrip lost the temporary immunity again. So there's a big change in your use case. You can and should use it every round that you have it now for a third action for continued damage instead of sustaining it. It's almost always a huge mistake to sustain it unless you're in a very particular situation where they took the bigger status penalty to move and all your allies are kiting with you.
Yeah.
It's now just like flat out a damaging cantrip that you can do every round to add D4 at every odd level of extra damage on top of everything else. So that's completely different use case than it used to have for like a single target fight. The static familiar ability makes a 5-foot burst of difficult terrain centered on your familiar's space, as opposed to an emanation. So a burst would be 4 squares, including your familiar space, whereas an emanation could be up to 9 squares, theoretically, although for tiny creatures, it's not well defined. It's until the end of your next turn. Now, I have tested similar antics recently with ice and difficult terrain, with giving people status penalties to their speed and putting difficult terrain on them. And I can tell you this. If you use it strategically and your party is willing to work with you, you can just start getting flawless victories on some encounters that you would have taken a big beating on before. However, the number of parties that are willing to play ball with that are pretty low. So I would say that doing Clinging Ice just over and over again for damage, pretty great. But using the familiar ability and Clinging Ice to try to like control the battlefield, talk to your party first. Most groups probably will not work with you on this. I even actually did a Reddit post wondering how many people would even, if the enemy had literally a complex hazard off in their room, like try to fight from just outside of the enemy's room in the tunnel leading up to it, which my group did. And I talked to a few groups of people who were like, that's really weird that your melee fighters didn't like charge into the deadly complex hazard and let the enemy use alt attacks on them. And I was like, I thought that was standard, that if the enemy has like a very favorable thing and you can just engage at range or ready in action, get them to move up to you so that they don't get all their attacks that turn, and then you beat on them on the next turn. And it was pretty split, and on Reddit it was pretty split. So
interesting, because I'm with you. I agree with you completely.
Yeah. Well, I know that your group, Jess, especially in PF1, and my group also cut their teeth a lot on some of those additions, use very similar, very high octane strategies. So I'm not surprised that now in PF2, our groups also use similar strategies of try to make the enemy come to you if you can. But many people on Reddit and that I was talking to before that said, oh no, yeah, for sure, our melees wouldn't have been able to wait to do their ready to action. They would have done a sudden charge on their turn. So I'm going to just use that as my own, and the abilities I was testing were even more powerful than Clinging Ice and the familiar ability. The amount of difficult terrain you could make, it did require 2 separate characters, one who made the difficult terrain and one who gave the status penalty. And the amount of status penalty, it was great. We went to the boss of the dungeon flawless victory by playing it right, the one that I was playtesting. But then the boss wrecked one of the fighters and would have killed her if we rushed in. So anyway, my point is check with your group first, but this is really cool.
Yeah.
So as the Queen of Winter, what do you think, Jess?
I like it a lot. And I agree with you that reducing speeds and creating difficult terrain, very powerful combination for controlling where the enemy goes and what their good options are and who they can reasonably reach in a turn. One of my favorite spells in PF2 is the spell Lose the Path, which is the reaction where you make an enemy's movement for like one stride difficult terrain. And that is an incredible defensive reaction on any caster just for controlling what an enemy's good options are on their turn and how many attacks they can make. Like if they are in a position where they think they're going to make one stride and then like 2 strikes, and that's going to be a really, or if they have a 2-action activity that they want to use once they close with someone, being able to deny them the ability to reach someone in 1 action, very powerful, excellent, wonderful. And Silence of Snow's Familiar of Freezing Rime isn't a reaction in the same way, but it still allows you to control the enemy's options. And I agree that it's most powerful if the rest of the party is working with you, but you can also just use this to create difficult terrain between yourself and the enemy. If your party is not willing to play ball, you can just use this to protect yourself.
You can. One of the things that also keeps it from getting too out of hand and is a limitation is that when they answer to the question of what can they actually reach now because they took a status penalty and are in difficult terrain, unfortunately is your familiar, because the difficult terrain appeared right next to your familiar. However, you could command your familiar to retreat after that, potentially. But not if you command your familiar to go in to use the ability. So it's a little bit, it is a little bit tricky to use, but if you use it right, it can do a lot. So it's very much like, one of those skill shot abilities in certain games where it's like, you only take this one if you know you have the skills and the combinations and maybe the group to get it to work. On the other hand, even if your group's not going to play ball at all, just nuking by recasting the cantrip every turn is still a decent amount of damage. Also, can't keep up with some of the later feats I'm about to talk about that do the most single action damage on any spellcaster, but you also can't use those every round.
Yeah, also, your familiar getting targeted isn't the worst thing for you and your party and how your enemy is spending their actions.
Yeah, your familiar will come back tomorrow. Yes, you can't refocus until then, but it will come back tomorrow. A lot of people don't feel as utilitarian about that, though, Jess. They're just like, it's my little friend. I don't want my little friend to die.
But you also don't want you to die.
No, that's true. That's true. And I think witch familiars just overall are going to die way more than they ever died before.
Yeah, I agree.
Among other things, basically the only counter strategy to resentment is to kill the familiar immediately before the witch gets their first turn. But even with some of the other stuff, I think the familiars are going to make themselves into a huge target.
Yeah, so, the interesting thing about trying to design a Pathfinder or D&D class that is a tank class is that, like, in an MMO, your tank is going to be someone who the enemy is going to target just because the tank has abilities to force the enemy to target them or whatever, right? They have the ability that just draws the aggro, and that's what the ability does. And TTRPGs don't typically have tank abilities in that way. The thing that makes you a tank in a TTRPG is being a desirable target for the enemy. You want to be someone who the enemy will want to target. And so the interesting thing about the resentment familiar is that it doesn't make your familiar into a tank who is going to survive for very long, but it absolutely makes your familiar into someone who the enemies probably will target, and they will not be targeting the rest of your party. And that is interesting. That is an interesting space for this familiar to occupy.
Yes, and you can take the familiar lifelink ability so that you can siphon off some of the damage and keep it up. So even the counter strategy of killing the familiar is not as easy as it sounds. Absolutely. The more damage that is split around your party, that means the longer it takes to kill the other party members.
Mhm.
And it's one reason why with intelligent weapons, I have like a section for like, what if you just want to be an item and not even a character and you don't contribute other than that, like on your turn, you activate. And I said in there, I give them enough abilities that I'm like, you count as a character, but keep in mind, the fact that you're an item and almost nothing can attack you is great and all, but that's one fewer target for the enemies to attack. So that also means that your group is always closer to a TPK because that's one fewer person who's up, and you're just a sword on the floor once that person who was holding you is down, that is just sitting there. And so it's very important to note that adding another target that can get killed actually is good for your team. That's true about animal companions too. Even if it gets killed, it kind of it saved someone else probably, and it made the fight easier. It's not a great feeling though for people. It's just like, it's my pet doggy. I
understand that Remaster introduced a feat that is the pet feat that gives you a pet that is not a familiar. And I think people who want a creature that is just a pet that is not attacked should just have a pet and should absolutely not, under any circumstances, be a witch. Because these are familiar. Like, in order to use your familiar's ability in combat, it needs to be out in combat. And I agree that often if your familiar is just like a fun little guy, that it's kind of a dick move, the GM, to attack the familiar. But if the familiar is in the combat making enemies sickened, then yes, it is a combatant and it should be targeted.
Yeah, or making them perma-stunned. So it's like the only way this person who is the boss of the encounter will get unstunned is if all the minions kill that familiar. Otherwise, it's stunned forever.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of reasons that you need to target them. And it is a dynamic that can lead to social contract issues for people who are like, my cat and my dog are my children, and so is my familiar. So you should actually consider having a conversation with your GM, especially if you are someone who thinks that your familiar is very precious, about what is going to go on here with the new remastered witch. You may want to consider doing some give and take where you tell the GM, okay, so there's these 6 level feats that do absolutely absurd things from my familiar for one action. I'm not going to take those. I'm not going to use some of these other abilities that I got for free. But in exchange, can we just say my familiar can't be attacked or something like that? You can make the bargain and compact, which may not be in this book, but you can make a bargain and pact with the most dangerous Fey entity of them all, the game master.
Dungeon master. Yeah, I agree. I think the remaster witch is very cool. I like that it gets the ability for the familiar to contribute to the combat in a way that familiars typically don't. However, because it is contributing to the combat in a way that familiars typically don't, it occupies a space in those combats that familiars have not occupied before. And like Mark said about the social contract, you need to be aware that this familiar is a combatant in a way that maybe you are not accustomed to familiars being combatants previously.
Right. So there's a super chat question from Derek that says, Evil Eye has a duration of sustained, which you can't reduce the sicken below 1 during the duration, but if it expires, would sicken go away, or do they still have to retch? So to me, it very clearly does not go away because sicken does not have a duration ever, and they still have to retch. However, I will admit that ruling, which is counter to how sicken works and would need to be specifically stated in the spell, and it isn't, is an excellent house rule to make it so that the sustain on Evil Eye is not a nombo, that is literally a trap where for new players where it's like, I've got this cool sustain, I'm going to use it, where it wastes your action and is literally worse than not using it. So I think that could be a good house rule for it. On the other hand, at that point, it might as well have been frightened, because if it's going to go away after the spell is over, that's what Frightened was going to do anyway. Like, what was the point of changing it from Frightened to Sicken if they didn't want it to have this issue where it was a non-bow. And Ian James said the same thing that I said, probably without having seen my reaction to it while he was typing it in. So that's what we've got for patrons. I'm not going to go through the lessons yet. If you've been watching all of these episodes, I saved the focus spells for the end, but I thought it was so crucial to talk about the cantrips alongside the other change, because Jess and I were talking about the theme and how they fit together a lot. So let's go into feats. We're going to start at first level. Cauldron. Cauldron was hugely buffed and is now one of the most dippable feats in the game for spellcasters taking the multi-class archetype. The other free consumable feats in the game are usually higher level, and potions were not designed around the idea that you could get a bunch of them for free. Certain items were like, we know you can get a bunch of these for free. That doesn't mean they'll be weaker, but we're going to like be careful about what happens at high levels. Low level consumables, you can't get for free, but they cost basically nothing at high levels, so we know they could be spammed. But like a 20th level potion, until now, there was not a way to just get a lot of those. So they really couldn't be spammed. They were a significant cost every time that they were used. They're not spam proofed. You get one potion, it has a very weird scaling and that I don't really actually understand. For levels 1 through 14, this first level feat gives you one potion that is all the way up to your maximum level. Now, the 18th level alchemist feat, Improbable Elixirs, which obviously alchemist is changing, lets you get tons and tons of alchemical items, but it lets you get potions up to half your alchemist level. So you could get like a 10th level potion from that. This is going to let you get a 20th level potion at level 20, but at level 15, it goes up to 2 potions. And level 19, it goes up to 3 potions. And it's kind of weird for a first level feat to scale in that way. Now, there's a later feat that has absolutely the most gorgeous name in all the feats for what it does, that doubles this amount, that comes in right around the point where it was already going to go up. So it just kind of balloons from just 1 for a lot of levels very quickly into 6 if you take them both. And obviously multi-class characters aren't going to get to double it, but it's still very favorable compared to even one of Wizard's strong feats, the scroll feat that's 12th level and gives you multiple scrolls. This first level feat is very favorable to that. So it's very, very, very dippable. I think there was a super chat. It says, do the new patron special familiar abilities apply every time you sustain a hex or only hex cantrips? It says sustain or cast a hex. Any hex. Doesn't have to be a cantrip.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's Cauldron. And Jess, I know you told me Cauldron had a lot of things and you wanted me to go to the nitty gritty on it. So that's the nitty gritty. What are you thinking about that?
It's going to be interesting to see what happened to Alchemist.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah. And Alchemist and a lot of other things that offer free consumables, because this one is like, weirdly, the others offer more consumables at first, but this just goes up almost equally as high, which is very, very late compared to all the other feats. So it's weird that it's a first level feat that is vastly better than a 12th level feat, but only at level like 19. And that's just like a weird way to make a comparison. This first level feat is vastly better than this 12th level feat at level 19. Is something I didn't think I would ordinarily say.
I like that it scales, but it's interesting that it scales in a way that is so unique for a first level option. It feels like something that you might want to retrain into regardless of what else is going on with your character once you get to higher levels.
Yep, for sure.
I don't know if there's other first level feats in that way that are like, you could take or leave this at first level, but once you get to like 11th level, like this is a must-have retrain.
Yeah, it's actually very competitive at first, but starting at 15th when it gives you 2, it's really good. And at 19th, it's really, really, really good for your first level slot. It's very interesting. So next super cool thing, the Eldritch Nails and Living Hair were combined with a new option, Iron Teeth, which is a D8 non-agile, into a single feat Eldritch Armament. You pick one of the 3. Elder Snails does not do that hex thing that barely worked on any hexes anyway. It no longer does that like it used to, but they was moved down from 4 to first level. The hair was moved down from 2 to first level. It's all first level. You can take it multiple times and gain all of them if you want. That's a very elegant way to do it.
Yeah, I like it. I like that they're combined. It's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. The next thing after that, Wart Witch feat was entirely removed. So there's no longer a Wart Witch feat that lets you like see through plants and things like that.
Yeah, to offer niche protection for the druid, presumably.
Maybe. I think it's just for copy fit and the things that were added that it was. But you know what? Merk site was not removed, and we'll get to that. I actually intentionally. I usually don't talk about things that weren't changed unless I noticed that there was an error that I missed when I went through it. But in this case, I thought that the fact that so many really powerful things were added and Merk site stayed the same was interesting. So I'll get to that. So improved familiar was removed, likely because specific familiars aren't in this book. So you would not know what to do with it if you did not have some of the pre-remaster books. New 4th level feat, Sympathetic Strike. Once per round, as one action, strike. If you hit, -1 circumstance penalty to saves against hexes or -2 on a crit. Solid. Very fun. You can use that with your hair, or you can use that with a witchy weapon.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, I like that too. I like that there is stuff like this later on in the Witch that gives you like a reason to take Witch's armaments on your spellcaster, because otherwise Witch's armaments would just kind of like be there and like, sure, you could have living hair, but are you actually going to use that? And this is giving you more and more reasons to like actually use that. Yeah,
absolutely. So next up, Ceremonial Knife. Such a good flavor for adding a feat. Like the idea of like a ceremonial, like a theme or something like that you use. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation. I don't know how to pronounce it out loud. I've only seen it written down. Is just so evocative for witches. There are numerous weirdly not well-defined things about the rules of this feat because it did not take into account certain wording. So it basically gives you have a knife, which is probably supposed to be one important knife to you, but it doesn't say that. That is essentially a wand that you get each day, except it doesn't say that it only lasts for that day. It just says that you get one. So you may be able to get infinite wands. You obviously are not supposed to get infinite wands. It also lets you destroy the wand, which, if true, would mean you get 2 copies of that spell every day, and you're destroying this highly significant personal dagger. So by overcharging it. So like, I feel like maybe the idea was that there was one dagger and that you don't get to do an infinite number because it's this one dagger. Maybe it's supposed to take an X amount of days to fix it if it gets destroyed, which will therefore make overcharging it an actual decision that you're like, oh no, this is serious enough to overcharge it. There's one more thing that is kind of, I would call those things to be definitely a mistake, that it doesn't tell you that it gets removed after a day and whether or not it's one knife or just I bought 200 knives and I destroy them every day routinely. The other one that is, I think, also a mistake is that a slight language variation between this and all other feats that give you something that gives you spells. The other feats are always, it's 2 levels lower or 2 ranks lower than the highest level witch spell you can cast. This one, I think, this one doesn't word it like that. It, I think, tried to be clever and word it like, we'll do it more simply. We'll just tell you what level it can be. But this is a problem because of multi-class poaching. So instead, it gives you a formula that is 2 levels lower. But all the other feats say 2 levels lower than your wizard or your witch or whatever for a reason. That reason is because a fighter who takes this feat can get 2 8th level spells in a 12th level feat slot. Whereas meanwhile, at very high levels. Whereas meanwhile, a fighter who takes the 18th level witch feat to get more witch spells does not get 2 8th level spells. They get 1 7th and 1 8th. So like, it is a 6th level feat that, when taken as a 12th level feat by a multi-class, is more powerful than the 18th level multi-class from that same archetype, because the wording was done slightly non-standardly. I assume that is also unintentional. It was an attempt to clear it up. So like, it's easier to just tell you what the numbers are than to say 2 lower than your highest, but there was a future proofing / current proofing component to it. What do you think about this feat? I love it, and I also think it needs a little bit of wording tweaking.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's very cool. I like the flavor. I agree with you that the knife destruction meta was probably not an intended aspect of this feat. It is probably meant to be that your ceremonial knife is precious to you in the same way that like your familiar is precious to you, and that you have one of them. And I agree that it probably should have had similar language to what happens if your familiar dies if your ceremonial knife is destroyed.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So next up, level 8. Very notably, Merk site was not changed. Mm-hmm. And there's a druid feat that's similar to it that's level 1. Mm-hmm. It's weird because some of these other feats are extremely powerful, including the ones I'm about to say right after this, which are so powerful that they are level 8 feats that many other classes would dearly like to take at level 16 from the multi-class archetype. But the Merk site was not changed, which is a little weird.
Yeah. Does the druid one do fog, mist, rain, and snow?
I think it does all precipitation.
Okay.
And it also does some other things in addition to that. Let me. I didn't actually completely read them side by side. Okay. So let me tell you, this is what Stormborn does. It says you do not take any circumstance penalties to range spell attacks or perception checks caused by weather, and your targeted spells don't require a flat check to succeed against the target concealed by weather, such as fog.
Weather. Okay.
Weather.
Okay. Yeah. And then it specifically says fog. Okay. Yeah.
And so I think that may even be more things than Merk site.
It is because it says weather instead of listing specific weathers.
But it only protects your spells, whereas Merk site does make it so that your weapon attacks and things like that, I think, also are not affected by the concealment. So it's not like the first level druid feat is strictly better.
Yeah. Merk site combos with the Starless shadow familiar needing to be unobserved or hidden in a pretty good way, because you can do like your fog clouds and whatnot, your obscuring mists, and then still be able to see through them.
Yeah. I mean, it's an effect that I like, but being at 8th level, especially since they created some really, 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 really buff 8th level feats, makes it hard to see a time that anyone would take it up against Spirit or Stitch familiar.
I think that's probably too high level. Like, I feel
people pointed out that Fog Cloud is magical and Merk site does not work on magical precipitation, which, by the way, the druid feat I think does, because it's any weather.
It just says weather. Yeah. Yeah. I don't care for Merk site.
Yeah.
I feel like the ability to see through fog is something that this system is often quite stingy about.
Yeah, PF2 is much less stingy about it than PF1, but in part that's because PF1's fog after like about 5 feet just completely blocked sight. And so there was a meta among many groups. There are a lot of metas that were miserable for everybody, including the GM, except for one player. One of them that was one that just literally caused many people that I know to be enraged was the meta of bring your own fog / smoke that you can see through, but no one else in your group can, and neither can any of the monsters. PF2 already avoids this because the fog does not prevent all sight after 5 feet. It's still just concealed. So I feel like you don't have to be as stingy with seeing through fog anymore now that fog is not like the everybody's angry at this one person ability.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Merk site, the only thing that Merk site has going for it is the fact that you can see through snow, and it doesn't say snowfall, it just says snow.
You're right.
Like,
you're right.
You can just see through like structures made out of snow. You can just see through like snowbanks.
Like normally I would say that that's rules learning on it, maybe, but at this point it's an 8th level
It's
feat.
8th level.
I think I'm gonna let you use it even if someone built an igloo entirely out of snow and just
no, I mean an igloo would be made out of ice. And
I guess it's made of ice. You're right.
There is a name that I think starts with a Q or a K for a structure that is made out of packed snow.
Oh, okay. Normally I would be like, if the dungeon was that Q or K name thing, that it would be maybe rules learning to say you see through the entire dungeon at once. But at this point, you spent an 8th level feat on it. I'm very tempted to just allow you to see through that dungeon, because this is the 1 in a million dungeon that was made entirely out of snow, and you got the feat that let you see through all snow. Absolutely.
Are there spells that let you... Quinsy, that's what it is, Quinsy.
Oh, a Quinsy. Okay.
Yeah. Awesome. So you would just be able to see through like any kind of like mound of snow. That's the only thing I can think of. I don't know why non-magical fog, mist, and rain even bothered to show up in this feat description, because I feel like this is all about seeing through the snow and all about seeing through like just mountains of snow.
All the snow. Dalek Reject in chat says that they line all their snow forts with lead for just this reason.
I mean, you gotta.
Yeah, this is just it's an oversight if you don't. So the next 2 feats together are new feats. They're incredibly powerful 8th level feats, Spirit and Stitch Familiar. Now, when you look at them not closely, you'll just be like, oh, look, it gives you a once per 10 minutes 2 action ability. Let's look at the damage. Okay. At level 9, it's 8d6. At level 11, it's 10d6. It's about 2d6 less than like a fireball or something of that level. And it also gives me a kicker, like restoring hit points equal to half the damage dealt for Spirit Familiar or Stitch Familiar. Very strong kicker. Very strong. Immobilized on a failure. Almost nothing immobilized on a failure. Usually immobilized on a critical failure, especially if you escape with spell DC. So that one's even stronger than the healing. The healing's already good. Then you realize it's not a 2 action ability for the witch. It's a 1 action ability for the witch, or a free action with the patron focus spell if you spend a focus point for it. And at that point, this is so strong for witch, and even without that focus spell, which a multi-classer wouldn't have, it is clearly worth a 16th level feat for anyone with a familiar to be able to use Stitch Familiar once per 10 minutes with no other cost, to be able to immobilize on a failure and do at 17th level, like right after you get it, it would do 16d6 for one of your actions. Very, very strong. Like, if you think about what the Nova turn is, at 10th level, you can get Quicken casting. So you could be casting your top tier spell, your top rank spell, one spell that's 2 ranks lower, and then free action focus point, the familiar does this. And so you're looking at like almost triple as much damage as a spellcaster normally puts out in a turn. So it is quite potent.
Yeah, I like this feat. It is potentially too potent for where it is, maybe, and maybe that is also the case for the way that it interacts with the witch multi-class archetype. I don't know. But I like that this is doing more with the idea of your familiar as an actual combatant that is actually in the combat and doing things and should be tanking damage. Enemies should be attacking your familiar because it can do this. Yeah.
I love the theme. I love the general idea of what it does. But at the amount that it does, I feel like it's basically mandatory, or your witch is significantly weaker than the witch that takes it. And there's 2 of them, but depending on your tradition, there's only one that you can take. I feel like that it's been spec'd as a 2-action damage effect, which no other familiar or companion AoE thing that only takes 1 action to use is spec'd as. So I feel like if it was spec'd at like a 1-action damaging effect, because that's what it is, it only takes 1 of your actions, so decrease the damage, make the immobilized not on a critical fail, and the regular failure is just a significant speed debuff until they escape. Then these are amazingly cool, flavorful. I now love them completely and have no reservations about them. They're no longer like 16th level. People will take them for 16th level if they could. And they do exactly what I want to see in a familiar feat. Right now, they are exactly what I can want to see, except for that they're also like they're very, very high up on the numbers.
Yeah.
And if that's what you want for the witch, that's okay. But maybe they should have been a class feature, because it is anything other than this, and your witch is much weaker than the witch that has it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is weird to have them at the same level as Merksite.
Yeah, that's why I actually called out Merksite, because I didn't call out other things that changed, even if they maybe were a little weak. But it would be like I do not understand any situation where anyone would ever, even if I told you that all the dungeons were going to be made out of snow from now on and you could see through all the walls, I would still take those other 8th level feats over Merksite.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I would consider it if it could see through every wall everywhere and I just get the entire dungeon map. I changed my mind.
The thing about Merksite, like, I know we've moved on, but the thing about Merksite is that, like, everybody agrees that a class feat should be more powerful than an ancestry feat of the same level, right? Like, that's uncontroversial. Ancestry feats aren't supposed to be that powerful, but, like, the ancestry feat where you can see through fog for, like, the sylph, or you can see through smoke for the Nari is only 5th level. And, like, those are narrower types of vision. It's not doing everything. It's doing like one type of vision, like smoke for the Nari or fog and mist for the sylph. But I don't think those specify only non-magical. I think you can see through magical smoke or magical fog with those, and they're 5th level, and they're only ancestry feats.
Yeah, they only cost your ancestry feat.
Yeah.
No, it's true. I didn't think that, like, maybe the amount of damage was chosen here by someone who was thinking of this as being a 2-action spend.
Yeah, I agree.
And whereas it's actually a 1 action or sometimes a free action. Yeah. That's the thing. Like, if I told you without looking at this class or anything, or that Paizo had published it, that I was writing a class, or maybe it wasn't me, because you're like, oh, it's Mark, maybe I'll listen. I'll just say whatever Mark says is okay. Maybe, but if I told you I found a third-party class on Pathfinder Infinite that had a focus spell where you, at the beginning of your turn, you spend 1 focus point to, as a free action at level 19, do 18d6 and immobilize on a failure, or even at level 8 or at level 9 do 8d6 and immobilize on a failure as a free action. I think everyone would be like, what are you doing? 8d6 and immobilize as a free action? So, like, it may be that this is the desired meta for Witch, but and Witch is supposed to just be better at doing Nova nukes. But in that case, it should have been a class feature, because this is so changing to what the Witch can do that not taking it is going to set you back compared to the other Witches.
I agree with you, unless you are that person who is saying to your game master, like, I'm not going to Nova my familiar, just don't attack my familiar.
That's the bargain I said. I said, I'm going to name some feats that I say are mandatory, and I said, I promise not to take those so you won't attack my familiar.
Yeah,
These are the ones I meant. There's some other ones that are... Spoiler alert, there's some other ones at level like 18 and 16 that I'm going to say are really strong, and that we would all be talking about as being the strongest if there weren't these level 8 ones that are almost as good while being like 10 levels lower.
By the way, I don't think anyone likes Jess, because this is the slowest we've ever gotten to 100.
No,
likes.
we've got more people watching now than several of the other episodes, but we don't have.
No one likes
No, it's
Jess.
not that no one likes Jess. It's that Jess didn't say what she was going to do, and people didn't want to force her to sing.
Yeah.
And so they are intentionally not hitting the like button.
You don't have to do anything. Let's just see
how
about this? Let's just see how many people like you.
Yes. So thumbs up if you like Jess, and Jess doesn't have to do anything. And we
There you
immediately
go.
got 10. And we were at 85 and we jumped to
Everyone
95.
supposedly likes Jess. Did you see in the newsletter? I even wrote fan favorite.
Yeah, people do like Jess. They just want to make it so Jess doesn't have to sing.
Fan favorite Jess.
Yeah.
So let's move on from Spirited Stitch Familiar. I really thought that was a good conversation about it. It's a very very interesting part. One of the most interesting changes in the feats. So double, best name for what it does. It doubles your Cauldron. It's the one I talked about before that's at level 10 and doubles. It doubles your 1 into a 2, which is like all right at level 10, especially since just getting a potion at the top of your level is pretty good. It was fantastic at level 1. It's all right at level 10. It's going to get really, really good at level 15 and 19 when it doubles a number that is higher. So it's once again, like you said, Jess, you might retrain into Cauldron and double at 15 to have 4 potions, and then just leave it there to get 6 potions.
Yeah.
It's and this one is not really poachable by multi-class. Yes, they could take it as their 20th level feat, but as a 20th level feat, I'm not concerned about it at all.
Yeah, that would be a bold choice for your 20th level feat.
There are some really high level potions that are really outrageous. I could see it, but it would be a very unusual choice.
I'm not going to say it's a choice that no one would make. I can see reasons why you would do it, but it's a bold choice.
Yes.
So you are making a statement by doing this with your characters.
You have
20th level feat.
You certainly are. You certainly are. And so at level 10, that is the only change. Level 12, super cool new reaction added Coven spell. Reaction, 30 feet, an ally casts a spell, either add damage to your sort of non-duration spell equal to the rank of the spell, which is great with cantrips, or apply a spell shape, aka mana magic, that was not on the spell just instantly to it.
Oh.
So there's a few things that this lets you do that can so first of all, I need to actually check the definition of spell shape for this, because I'm thinking maybe there's a precaution against it. But I don't think spell shapes say that you can't have 2 spell shapes on the same spell, because just the way they're defined, you definitely can't have 2 spell shapes on the same spell, because literally the definition says they have to be done before the spell, and you can only do 1 at that point in time. However, with this feat, you can have 2 spell shapes on the spell, and they could be mutually exclusive in a way that literally, like, sort of forces the GM to make something up. If one of them changes the spell in a way that the other one, like, can't change it anywhere. Like, imagine a spell shape that changed the spell from a cone into a line, and another one that made the cone, like, do something in the center of the cone or something like that. So it's possible to get up 2 spell shapes that may interact with each other in an unknown way. And it doesn't have a limitation that the spell shapes have to be a 1 action or free action spell shape. So if anyone ever publishes like a thing where it's like ritualistic spell, 1 minute spell shape, and after it's done, the full minute is over, it gets this really powerful effect, because we know you couldn't do that in combat. It's a minute. You can still use that with Coven spell, or a 2 action one where it's like, well, this can only be used with a 1 action spell. So it can be really powerful because it's a 2 action spell shape. You can use that with Coven spell as well. It probably may want to say that it can't be used on something that already. Oh no, it says that it doesn't have a spell shape. It does. The first one it already has. It can't have 2 spell shapes. I was wrong about that one. It doesn't have a limit on the number of actions. That's what I get for improvising, because I didn't see it when I was reading it just now, and I added that, but my notes only talked about the actions. I should have gone with my notes. Past Mark was much smarter than current Mark. So the number of actions really isn't specified, which it probably should have said if it's a 1 action or free action spell shape.
Yeah.
The other thing is totally wrong, though, because it does say it can't have a second spell shape applied.
Yeah, it's trying to do future proofing for something that, like, maybe you have made internally a decision that you will never do is a weird zone, because, like, It just says any spell shape, and it's possible that Paizo has made a decision that like the only spell shapes they will ever publish are one action or a free action. And so there's been like an internal decision made that like no spell shape will ever be created that wouldn't work for this because no like ritual spell shapes will ever be made. And so it's a weird thing to want to future proof against something that you would like simply never do. But
when you have enough freelancers and you have enough developers and you have enough books, the question is, do I need to add that to my design guide and teach that to every developer at Paizo, even after the people who made that decision have left and there are new people on the design team and the development team, and teach it to all the freelancers? Or can I just future proof it just in case?
Right, yeah.
So that I'm...
Even if it were in a design guide, it would still not help you with what things that people might publish on Infinite.
Oh, well, that's certainly true. A hidden internal design guide would not help Infinite. But let's assume let's assume that you say, well, you know what? Why am I going to do this to help other publishers? I would like to do things to help other publishers personally. But course. Even if you assume that you're not going to help other publishers, even if it's just I only care about myself when I'm future proofing, I still think you should do it because the number,
I agree.
The chance that in an AP somewhere that somebody's going to do it at some point, right? Or in a comic back matter, which get things sometimes is higher than you think. I was totally wrong about getting 2 spell shapes, though. I just missed it this time around when I was reading it. Next, Familiar's Eye feat is gone. There is no Familiar's Eye feat at 12th level. Hex Focus, like all the 12th level focus feats, is now pretty niche because it refills you immediately, but you could already usually spend 30 minutes if you could spend 10. And so it's not necessarily going to help you that often. Obviously, the one time you do have 10 and not 30, it's a big benefit. And the Wellspring 18th level feat was cut again, just like all of the Wellspring feats. Next up, awesome new feat alert, Witch's Broom. Of all the flying feats that like basically give you flying that are somewhere around this level, the one that gives you a broom is the coolest because you get a broom. That is my opinion. And it could be wrong, but it could also be objectively correct because you get a broom. Yeah,
broom, interestingly, unlike Witch's Knife, specifies that during your daily preparations, you can anoint a single broom, staff, polearm, or a similarly shaped object. I don't think...
Ceremonial Knife does say that you can do it during daily. It just doesn't say that it only lasts for the day or that it has to be the same one each time. So you, as written, and it's so ludicrous that no GM would allow it, but as written, not only could you say that you have 100 throwaway knives, you could spend 100 days before the adventure preparing 100 knives, all of which still have the spell, because it doesn't say, Ceremonial Knife doesn't say it only remains the wand until your next daily preparation.
Okay. So Witch's Broom says until the next time you make your daily preparations.
Witch's Broom does have that.
Yeah, so Witch's Broom says until the next time you make your daily preparations, and that is the part that Ceremonial Knife is missing.
Yeah, Witch's Broom is great. Yeah. It's got that in there. That is one of the things that Ceremonial Broom is definitely missing. And then whether it wants to be a special knife is unclear. Maybe it doesn't, and you're supposed to just destroy hundreds of knives. Whereas with the broom, it can be a different broom each time. That's fine. You're a witch. You ride around with your broom. Awesome feat. Next up, Patron's Presence is a 14th level feat. It is once per hour. Much like the 8th level feats, is one of those things where it's a 2 action for your familiar, so it's really only 1 action for you. And it's actually 0 actions if you spend a focus point. This one, I would say, based on it being 6 levels higher and once per hour, is likely going to be less disruptive as a 1 action ability than the 8th level ones are, even though it's pretty strong in that it's a stupefied 2 or 3 on a critical failure aura that your familiar can sustain, which is easy enough for it to do usually, up to a minute. It's very cool, but I think now that it's at level 14 and is only once per hour, it's going to do less Nova potential than being once per 10 minutes and doing the amount of damage and immobilize that the other ones could. I don't know. What do you think about that one in comparison to the ones from before?
I am currently force closing my PDF reader.
Fair enough. So then in that case, I'll talk about the next change, because nothing changed at level 16. It still only has 2 feats. They do the same thing. Level 18, Patron's Claim, in the same boat. It's level 18. It's a 2 action for your familiar again, once per hour. It's really good. It does basically the same amount of damage as the 8th level ones do at that level, which you may be like, wait, why is he saying it's good that this 18th level one does that? But then on a failure, they are very drained. 2 drained, which is way more damage once they are drained 2. Drain 4 on a critical failure. That is absolutely an enormous amount of drain. And you regain a focus point if they fail. So if they fail, if you bear with me on this, if they fail, you spent a focus point for patrons, for your focus spell to do this as a free action. And if they fail, you get the focus point back that you spent. So it costs 0 focus points on a failure to do 10d10 spirit damage and drain 2. Now, it is true that you get this at level 18, and it's about, if they do succeed, it's about the same damage as the level 8 ones. And if they, at level 19, the level 8 ones scale up the damage, and this one doesn't. It only scales up drain, naturally scaling up. And so if they succeed, they don't get drained at all, and they will take a little bit less. It's still very good, but like, it's it is not necessarily as much better of the level 8s as you would think for a level 18, but that's partially because the level 8s were really, really, really strong for their level. And it does kind of really illustrate the fact that since it gives you back the focus points from using the focus points to do it as a free action, that this is kind of a free action 55 damage, drain 2, drain 4 on a critical failure ability. Or you can go up a focus point if you spend the 1 action for it. So
these, I feel like the thing that is weird about both of these, this one and the 8th level one, is just the fact that it's 2 actions from your familiar and not 2 actions from you. It does seem like that's just where this kind of disconnect between these and everything else is happening.
Yeah. If they wanted to keep the damage where it is, I would have preferred it as something where it's like, you spend 2 actions to command your familiar this turn, and then they get to move and then do this. They actually take 3 because you spent more actions to command them. So it gives them a little more flexibility. Because it is true that your familiar has to be in position to do this, which of course 90% of witches probably have their familiar like on their shoulders. So they are, because the witch can just move the familiar there anyway. But if you gave the familiar the ability to move for free, that would encourage you to be able to move them separately from themselves. And then you spend 2 actions, so you're not combining this with a big spell on the same turn.
Your familiar is not necessarily on your shoulder anymore, though. Like, that's definitely true of the pre-remaster witch, but now that you have these abilities that your familiar can do on creatures that are adjacent to it or creatures that are within 15 feet of it or what have you, your familiar is more likely now to already be in position.
You're right. But you would have to get them there if they weren't, if it wasn't because you went within 15 feet, you at least can't do it on the first turn. Whereas if you went within 15 feet, then you can do it on or 30 feet in this case, you can do it on the first turn. Or I suppose in this case of the 18th level one, it is 30 feet. So you do have to get pretty close. It's a lot of damage.
The only thing that I can think about that would be interesting with the fact that this is, because you can only command a familiar once, right, on your turn?
You can only command them once to take the 2 actions. You couldn't command them again and make them do another one of those things. Oh my gosh. You can't do that.
Right. No, but do familiars like even have other things that are competing for the rest of their actions other than moving? Is like, what is actually competing for your familiar's actions in this scenario? Like, you have this ability where your familiar can use its 2 actions to do like a big devastating nuke, but what's actually competing with your familiar's actions for that? Because we've established what's competing for the witch's actions. It's like nothing. You can do this as a free action. But is there something else compelling that you're not doing with your familiar because you're spending both of its actions on a 2-action activity?
So if you're spending both of your actions on Patron's Claim, then you're not using Stitched Familiar.
Yeah, but are they like the only things that compete with each other?
I mean, there are other things you can
factions?
get if you have a specific familiar, like then, for example, Elemental Scamp in Rage of Elements is a great example of this being balanced. I would say the normal way for a thing that's not a familiar that's based on one action rather than this very unusual different way where and it is a remastered familiar. Once per hour, the familiar as 2 actions does 1d6 damage for every 2 levels you have.
Yeah.
This is half as much as the other ones do, which I even said about half, and then their debuffs are also a little bit potent on top. Now, this is a 10-foot cone, which will hit multiple targets, and the familiar ability there is a single target, although has a very powerful debuff as well.
Yeah.
So, but this is once per hour, and the 8th level feats are once per 10 minutes. So Elemental Scamp gives the best example of a competing feature, and it is a specific familiar that you pay significant like numbers of familiar abilities. The Scamp actually doesn't have a lot. It only needs 5, but if you look at what the Scamp gets as its abilities, it doesn't get very many. And when you count them up, it shows that the Scamp is paying a lot for the Elemental Breath based on the calculus of specific familiars.
Yeah.
So that's a good question, Jess, and that is my answer. Fairy Dragon does a stupefied 2 and slowed 1 for 1d4 rounds breath. That it can do once per hour as a 2 action as well, and that's pretty good. But it is certainly no immobilize until they escape with unlimited duration while doing 2d6 damage per 2 levels.
Yeah.
All right, so last feat that was changed, level 20, Witch's Hut. Hide was moved to the correct place alphabetically. Previously, it was not in the correct place alphabetically. The leap option was added. It now does a 10th rank teleport for everything in the hut, which normally you would not be able to teleport everything in the hut, and now you can. It's also an uncommon option, which means that, but you're level 20, so whatever. Getting an uncommon ability may be fine at this level. Wizards are creating more of a problem for a GM who wanted teleport to remain uncommon because PF2 tried to make it so you could tell stories where people didn't have teleport. Because we'll see tomorrow, Wizards are about to give one of their schools teleport anyway, even though it's uncommon, right away. So by 20th level, I think witches can get this and be just like Baba Yaga, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So that's it for feats. Let's go into the hexes.
Yeah.
There are a lot of small changes. Some of them got more significant changes. Most of them were small changes. Blood Ward lost the temporary immunity clause. The Lesson of Elements, Air Bubble was swapped for Gust of Wind in one of the 4. You get to pick one of 4 elemental spells, and Air Bubble was swapped for Gust of Wind. A Metal and Wood spell were not put in. Elemental Betrayal, though, was changed to use elemental traits. I did believe including metal and wood, and it now uses weakness instead of additional damage, so it is not cumulative with a creature that already had a weakness, whereas before it would be. Deceiver's Cloak can be sustained for up to an hour instead of 10 minutes. Though since you can't really refocus while in the middle of sustaining, it's not as abusable as other 1-hour focus spells would be. Other tiny changes. The last one was not a change, and then we can talk about the focus spells overall. Malicious Shadow kept attribute modifier to damage, even though every other spell in the game did not. I suspect that is just because whoever was doing that change did not find it here, and I believe that it will probably be changed from 1d10 plus attribute modifier to 2d10, which will buff it at early levels and make it slightly weaker at level 17 and above, which honestly... it's not much of a change. It's a buff at early levels. At level 17 and above, you're not going to mind that it does a half less damage and 1.5 less at level 20, since it would do like 1.5 more when you first get it. So,
yeah.
What do you think? Not very many changes to the focus spells, I feel. The ones that cost the points.
Yeah.
Any of those feel significant? Not
particularly, no.
Yeah. I don't think that's where the main focus was in the class.
Yeah, the most significant change to the witch, like obviously there were the changes to the patrons in terms of like what they give you. There's a new type of thing that they give you, and like the flavor was amped up on them. But like ultimately the biggest difference between pre-remaster witch and post-remaster witch is just the role that your familiar plays in a combat.
Yeah. I really like the new
style.
role and the play style. There are certain things like we talked about where like maybe they do a bit much with some of them, but the new playstyle is absolutely perfect for doing something different than anyone else does.
Exactly. It's very compelling. It differentiates you from the other prepared casters. I like this direction a lot. I like the playstyle of having a familiar that is quite powerful, but in order to use its power, it has to be in danger, and it's a familiar, so it's kind of it's a little guy that's in danger when you put it in danger. Like it's in real danger.
I'm in danger.
Exactly. So I like that a lot about the remaster witch. I think that the options of what you can do with your familiar are compelling enough to drive you to put your familiar in danger. But it's very important that as a player, you are okay with this familiar getting attacked. I don't think that you necessarily should play a witch if you don't want your familiar to get attacked. I think you should just be some other class and take like the pet feat, so that you have just a pet that's just a little guy, it's just your friend, and it doesn't have a combat role.
Yeah. I think there's going to be a strong fork between the people who understand the utilitarian benefit of the fact that the familiar being targeted doubles down on being good for you. And the people are like, no, not my familiar. You're the meanest GM ever. You attacked my familiar. It was just a little guy.
Yeah, it's difficult because if this class feature were called something other than familiar, it would be different. Like, people understand that as a summoner, your summon is getting attacked, and that your summoner,
your hit points.
Exactly. Your Eidolon is going to be attacked. Your Eidolon might just be a little guy, but your Eidolon is a little guy who, much like you, is in the combat to be targeted by enemies. And you don't play a summoner if you don't want your Eidolon to get targeted by enemies. And it's important that like the witch works because the familiar is going to get targeted by enemies. A lot of the choice analysis that you're making with using these abilities is the threat of your familiar being targeted because it got close enough to use them. And the fact that that threat exists is important.
Yeah.
I lost track of where that sentence was.
No, you're right. It changes the meta. It changes the social contract. If we mentioned before, you may want to make a deal with your GM if you were not on the side of Jess and me, where it's like the dead familiar is a living non-familiar and is easy to replace. I have many characters, by the way, who wouldn't agree with me, who if I was talking in my character voice, they would go get into an argument with me and be like, Mark, you were cruel. And this is not how I feel at all. My player does not represent the feelings of me, the character, who do want to protect their familiars. Because when I'm role-playing, I'm not role-playing all my characters as being a Machiavellian chess master. In fact, few of my characters are. So it's interesting. And the last thing is in which archetype, I alluded to this earlier, is already one of the most powerful caster archetypes because of the fact that it gave you one fewer cantrip, but half a familiar, which could give you back the cantrip if you wanted or something else. And then if you took the feat, if you took the fourth level feat to gain a witch feat, it gave you back the other missing familiar ability. Now it also gives you all the familiar abilities right away. So it was already better than the other options. Now it's just like, even if you take the familiar that you get from it and throw it in a sack and leave it in the inn, you could take 2 extra cantrips from the familiar and have 3 cantrips, and everybody else got 2 cantrips. And that's the least you could do with it. And if you take the basic feat, which you might do for Cauldron at high levels for all the reasons we said, or any of these other feats that are very dippable, the knife one, until they fix it, or if they fix it, that gives you like higher spells than the 18th level feats, it'll immediately give you a third ability with the familiar, which then at that point, if you consider that number of cantrips you could take from that, it would be twice as many as the other classes got, in addition to everything they would have had. So it makes Witch like weirdly like Wizard multi-class Witch is a much better gain from the multi-class than Witch multi-class Wizard gains from the Wizard multi-class, because Witch has a lot of dippable things and its multi-class dedication is just better than the other ones.
Yeah.
Yep.
And,
just an interesting side note.
Yeah, and I've thought more about the familiar as just a little guy, and I think if you have a player who wants to be a witch, but their familiar is their buddy, and they feel weird about their familiar being attacked, maybe the solution is just to reflavor familiar death. Your familiar isn't dead, the enemy's just knocked your connection to your patron out of your familiar, and it no longer has familiar abilities, but it's still a cat.
Yeah.
It's not dead, it's just been
sleeping.
It's been taken out of sync with your patron, so it no longer functions as a familiar, but like as far as being a cat is concerned, the enemies don't really care about being cruel to animals. They just care about desyncing it with your patron so that it's not a threat anymore.
Yep. It's just its awakenedness is sleeping. It's just a normal cat for now.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Joseph Moore says, I guess, but like fireball is fireball. I don't know. I think a cat could jump out of the way of a fireball. But that's just how I feel about cats.
You could also just say that the familiar escapes the combat.
Yeah.
At 0, it turns into a cat and runs away.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Or like on your next turn, you call it back to sit on your shoulder. It climbs into your little familiar backpack satchel.
Or even if you're like, well, this has mechanical implications, fireball, etc. Here's what you could do. Just be like, let's say I'm darkness. I'm the enveloping shadows. It's like, okay, the familiar reads 0. All right, so my dark black cat, like a comforting blanket of darkness envelops the cat and it vanishes into the patron's embrace of shadows. It respawns out of my shadow. It's the same cat. It survived. It just was sent back to my patron. It was chatting with the patron, comes out of my shadow the next day being like, oh man, I was talking to your patron yesterday and let me tell you something. They said, why did you let me get attacked by that thing? And it was very annoying. But I was hanging out in the darkness for a while. Mm-hmm. And when night fell, I returned into your shadow or whenever you prepared your thing. So like you could flavor it even if they don't stay with you, as that they didn't die, but they were saved by your patron and they had to return to your patron's side. There's a lot of options that you can do with this. And it's a fantastic class, a really, really nice rebuild. And obviously, I'm sure most videos are going to spend a huge amount of time on the resentment, but I wanted to look at the other patrons more. So
yeah.
And I'm glad we got time to talk about it. What was your favorite patron for theme and for like getting a good use out of it in maybe in combat and in play in the resentmentless world where we have all the other ones? What do you think?
Mark, I feel like you could like get it in one guess which one of these patrons is my favorite.
I think it's winter.
Oh no, you were wrong.
I was wrong, but you said you liked winter.
I
was wrong.
I like the mechanics of winter. It's cool, but as far as me just being like an edgelord with the taste of a 12-year-old boy,
fine.
Does it for me.
I was gonna say Starless Shadow for that reason.
Yeah.
My 3 guesses would have been winter, silence and snow, because it's elemental. You stated that you liked it and that you liked that combo.
I do like
Wilding Steward, because you talked about really liking the way that the things in it were together and that it gave the interesting gameplay element of discouraging people from attacking you.
Yeah.
And then I would have also thought maybe Starless Shadow because of the reason you said of edgelordness.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have been able to pick. I just happened to be looking at them starting from the bottom and I saw Winter and I went with it and I was wrong.
Yeah. Especially for like the flavor reasons. I love that Starless Shadow. And it is like finicky to get in with a group to make this work, but I would figure out a way to make it work. Like other things that are finicky to make them work that I also love, the Shadow Sorcerer, love that thing. The Shadow Dancer, love that thing, even though it's like the most annoying thing to get onto a character of all time. Being a Shadow Dancer is so obnoxious. Like it's less annoying in Pathfinder 2 than it used to be, and it's gonna have to be renamed because Shadow Dancer is like
an OGL
so classic. Yeah. It's an OGL name. It's so classic Dungeons and Dragons, but like especially in 3rd edition D&D, being a Shadow Dancer was so annoying. Like you had to dip into Fighter to get that many feats. It was
very weird.
And the performance, right? Like you still need like master in performance?
Yes.
Expert. You need to be expert or master in Pathfinder 2 still in performance. Like so annoying.
It's tricky.
But
Pathfinder 1's version also just had a lot of abilities that seemed to think that they were very useful. And then an incorporeal shadow that could do degenerate stuff that was like very useful, but did not seem to think it was the main part of the
That's always been the way.
Class.
That's always been the way of Shadow Dancer. It's always been like you are.
I should have remembered that you would pick Darkness because of the fact that you wanted to write Shadow Dancer for me for Advanced Player's Guide, but you didn't have enough time to write those words, so you took Dandy. I should have remembered that way back in the day when I was assigning out Advanced Player's Guide. If I had just thought of that, I would have known that you would pick Knight. Or whatever the new Knight name is. That's awesome name. Starless Shadow.
Yeah.
Awesome name.
Yeah. If I had a witch familiar, which animal would I rather it be? My witch familiar, if I were playing a witch, the familiar would not be an animal. I would do something like really edgy. Like I would be Starless Shadow and my familiar would be my shadow. And my shadow would just like walk around.
Would it be a long Furby that trails off into a shadow?
That would be good.
There we go.
Yeah, Bartholomew could be my familiar.
So people in chat have pointed out we did exceed 100 likes when we got to the point of who just likes Jess and does not want to force her to do anything.
Yeah. I guess I could go get Bartholomew.
There you go.
Yeah.
If people want to see Bartholomew the long Furby for 100 likes.
I will be right back. I will go.
If you give us 200 likes, we won't let her show Bartholomew.
Yes. If this stream gets 100 likes in the next, I don't know, like however long it takes me to go get Bartholomew, I will not put him in front of the camera.
That's correct. AK, I'm saying that you're going to see the long Furby now.
Now it's quiet. Look at that.
Yep. Looking for the long Furby.
Well, the long Furby is weird.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've always been giving them weird things when they gave 100 likes, Steven. Like, us singing is weird, too. Is that something that you expect to see on Roll for Combat? I guess at this point, maybe people did.
Mm-hmm. I guess.
Maybe. So, yeah, the Witch had some of the most changes of any of these. Cleric, I think maybe pound for pound had more because they're just a million domains, so there's more to change. But Witch percentage-wise had a lot of changes because Witch is just not as long as Cleric since it doesn't have a million domains. And so between those two, you see a lot of change. And here's Bartholomew, the long Furby. Isn't that just as familiar, everybody? Tell me in chat if you think it's her familiar.
That's a weird familiar.
Yes, this is Bartholomew.
Bartholomew, the weird familiar.
Yes, his little feats.
Can I target him?
Can you target Bartholomew? I mean, if he's like running around the battlefield making you afraid, I suppose so.
Oh, there you go. And
Yeah.
Magic missile to Bartholomew. All right.
You magic missile out the darkness?
I guess so.
I mean, unfortunately for you, Bartholomew has a brooch of shielding.
Oh man, isn't that OGL? I think they got rid
That's
of that.
true.
That's right.
true.
So I guess
Fortunately
it does
for
not.
Steven.
It's like you tried but failed because it doesn't exist anymore. Sorry.
I believe there is actually one of the seasons of Dice Will Roll. They have a witch who's familiar as a long Furby.
Oh, okay.
Really?
There you go
what's
then.
it
So this
called?
isn't even the first time.
No, this is not.
Wait, what's it called? If it's...
Oh, people pointed out Magic Missile was also OGL though, so you
No, I know
probably
Magic
would have.
Missile, except for
You would have used the like missile
who said I'm using
fusillade or what the name
Pathfinder?
is.
Mm.
Oh, well,
You guys are
no one
assuming-
said that for
You're
sure.
assuming a lot. And who said I'm using Pathfinder Second Edition?
You could be using
Mm.
Starfinder for all we know.
That's right. I could be using Starfinder. I could be using D&D First Edition. Who knows? It could be anything. You guys just assume because we talk about Pathfinder Second Edition that we only refer to Pathfinder Second Edition. Have you ever done
Well,
that?
I mean, I think that given this is a Pathfinder 2e stream, that
Mhm.
people were assuming that that's what it was about.
You never
Yeah,
assume.
that makes sense.
Never assume. Could always get into trouble. You always have
There
to
you go.
define your parameters, as Mark has learned, as I'm giving him endless corrections to intelligent weapons.
Look, I already knew that, Steven. I already put in like 30 corner cases, but you absolutely did find a few
Oh, I'm
more.
going to keep going. I'm going to find
Oh,
every
I'm sure
corner
you'll find more
case.
after that. I have to do the last two of them after this stream. So as soon as we end, I'm going to put in his last two.
Endless corner. It's
I
up to...
expected to have them before the stream, but we
That's
needed
fine.
to do some things for RPG Superstar. And so it wound up that I did not have them all before the
I know.
stream because I had to get Witch prepared and RPG Superstar since that happened
Yes,
today.
yes. 11,000 words and it's still going up.
Yes. You'll find more corner cases. I'm sure you will. I really appreciate some of the ones you found were really important. Some of them I'm like, I don't think this is that important of a corner case, but we might as well cover it. But some of them are like, no, this is a big corner case, and I would have missed it even with all the ones I found. Because being a weapon is so different than not being a weapon.
That's right. As we found out the hard way. Speaking of that, how's Swarmblood going?
You know.
No, I don't know. That's why I asked you.
It's not due for like months, Steven.
Yeah.
Well, how's the thinking going then?
I am working on other things that are due.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. When you get a popular author who may have been hired by other companies or us for other
Mhm.
things that are more due than Swarmblood,
Yeah,
then
yeah.
they're going to be working on those other things before the one that's
Yeah.
not due yet.
Fine. That's fine. How's Dragons going? Did you finish your Dragons or no?
I'm still writing them.
Okay. Just checking.
Those are the ones that she's probably working on more, but we saw some of
Yes.
the previews from the Great Worms in one of the, and that you can go back on the Roll for Combat Live to the episode with the big dragon picture. It's like a few weeks back.
There's Dragons
That's like,
on the stream right now. If you look down next to...
oh yeah, it's one of the suggested episodes. It says dragons, devils, and angels on the thumb. It says learn more about designing ancestries and dragons, and it has some of Jess's cool Great Worm ideas were mentioned in there.
Yeah.
There you go.
So yeah, I think we did a pretty deep dive of the witch. I'm pretty happy about the analysis that Jess and I gave. We gave some different perspectives on some of the abilities. I hope it gave people in chat who you may have read about some of these already because the preview on Python.com blog did a pretty good job of covering a lot of them. And other people have shown some of this text, but I hope it did a good job of analyzing it so that you can think about the text, the implications, what it means for your witch, if you've got one that you're going to build in, and to think ahead if you want to have a social contract conversation, make a bargain with your GM, or if you're the GM, if you know your player is the one who just loves their little hamster familiar or whatever it is, to preemptively ask them and be like, hey, listen, we're updating to the remaster, but I think that good, smooth, and transparent conversations with your group is key.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think even if you don't have like some advanced reason of suspecting that your player might not want their familiar attacked, I think it's, especially for the witch, it's going to be important to have that conversation regardless of what your expectations from that player are. Because I think that the change in the witch playstyle where your familiar is a combatant and you are putting your familiar in positions where it is going to get attacked, definitely, and how much damage is the familiar taking and what are you doing with the familiar in combat are like all decision considerations that you're going to be taking. I think that's really interesting and compelling, and I like that a lot about the witch class, but because familiars have this history of being just your little pal that the GM doesn't attack because it's a dick move to attack your familiar because they're going to die and then it's going to cost you like experience points to bring them back. Like all that stuff holding over from previous editions of the way that the social contract around familiars has evolved, it's going to be incredibly important to have a conversation about the fact that that has changed. That is not necessarily the way that you can have a familiar and be a witch.
100%.
There you go. We didn't.
What do you think, Steven? Are you going to tell us that you always killed everybody's familiars, even back in the day?
Well, I used to target them even as recently as now, but they complain so much that I'm like, oh, all right, enough already.
Steven is a perfect example of this social contract thing.
Wait, you didn't let me finish. You didn't let me finish. What happens if you have an AoE go off? You have a fireball. I'm not targeting them. They're in the area. Yeah. What am I supposed to do?
That's not on you.
Right.
If the AoE goes off, they're in the area.
I didn't say I target them specifically, but then they're always conveniently ignored when that happens.
I see.
Yeah. That's quite common.
Yeah. Say. Well, what we do is they're like, oh, they're tucked in my armor or something. I'm like, fine, whatever. It's like it's not worth the argument. So when are they gonna take care of that? When are they gonna actually? Although to be fair, as someone who played a hunter exclusively in World of Warcraft, and you had pets, what they used to do is that the pets would have all, because like there were AoE spells and stuff, and the pets' stats were so much higher in their saves, and they would only take a very tiny fraction of damage that you would take. And you also had ways to move aggro off of them onto yourself. So it was very hard. Like you can get hit by a fireball that would do hundreds of thousands of points of damage, and then your pet would take that same fireball and get like 10 points of damage. It's just they have so many buffs on them, and
that's why historically familiars have like improved evasion and stuff.
They do. It helps protect against those AoEs.
This isn't even like improved invasion. It's like super duper improved invasion because they don't get anything on them. It's like their saves are too better than everything. It's like nothing happens to them.
So I'm sure no one's surprised since I haven't killed anybody at all in PF2, but I have not killed any familiars in PF2. In PF1, I have a very memorable moment from a Pathfinder Society special, which had mythic opponents against non-mythic PCs at very high levels. And one of the characters was killed. So another character sent their familiar on its initiative, which was separate in PF1, to fly in with gloves of breath of life that they had loaded out the familiar with tons of magic items, which was allowed in PF1 to do. And the mythic Nalfachni that killed the PC, I was like, okay, cool, but like you're flying into my reach, right? They're like, yeah. I was like, okay. I was like, are you sure? They're like, well, I'll use acrobatics. And they used acrobatics, I think, but then they tried to activate the gloves of breath of life, and that provoked an attack of opportunity. The mythic Nalfachni critted with a natural 20 for a ×3, which it had because it was mythic, and the familiar was instantly killed.
Yeah.
I remember that. The player was very sad, and I felt bad, but it's a demon.
I've killed familiars.
And it was a demon, and their familiar was a celestial. It was definitely going to attack it, and it prevented them from bringing back to life someone that the demon really, really wanted dead. there weren't many options in PF1 to stop something from happening without killing because the death window was so small.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I've killed familiars because I remember now the rule was like you had to wait a week, and it was like
Yes.
such a pain in the neck. And people were like, ugh. And then after that, I was like, I think the first and last time, I don't even bother after that. It's just too
Yeah,
hard.
but that's not the case for the Dead Familiar rules anymore. And so,
Well, it's not for witches, especially.
Exactly. And so the consequences of the familiar dying are in line with the expectation that they will die.
Right.
So you just name them like Snowball 2.
Yeah, that's
No, it's the same. It's the same creature. Your familiar as a witch is a conduit to your patron. There's no reason not to expect that it's the same creature every time.
Yeah, it could be.
That's not fun. You want to have
But you can
numbers.
decide that it is Snowball 2 and be like, this is Snowball 95.
Right. It's like you have a little bit of pride how many times it's died.
Or if you're the one that peers through fate, you could call your familiar Windows, and then it would be Windows 95 or whatever it was. And then you can make all sorts of terrible jokes.
That's not even a joke.
This sounds like a Homestuck.
That was I don't know what that was. That was not even a joke.
There you go.
Below a joke. That was pathetic.
No, I understand that it was an operating system Windows 95 joke, but there is there's a fair amount of Homestuck plot that revolves around a window.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. So it's got lots of different options.
Well, in our game, Lauren has a wolf, which I gave her. Though the wolf has gotten so weak that it just stays in her Pokeball. She like is it pet cache, so she always puts it away. And then the familiar for the witch. I don't know does it actually have to be there with you when you're fighting if it's not doing anything?
No. The only time you literally need to have it is when you're refocusing.
Oh, then that's all they do.
And at the beginning of the day when you're preparing, but it comes back at that point anyway, even if it died.
Oh no, they're always feeding spells to it. Like it's always eating its spells. So, what's your thought of that? A witch is basically just a wizard in different colors. Because
I think it's pretty different. It's got a different flavor. It
does, but you can still
different
learn.
number of. It's got fewer spells, but it has a bunch of interesting other effects, and especially with the remaster, which really did a great job in giving this play style of using your familiar. It has a different play style too. Yeah, I think if you're going to claim that, then you could also claim the witch is just a sorcerer in different flavors because it can do all four traditions. The witch has divine, primal, and occult. Those wizards does not have those three.
Well, my witch in our game has all four because they got all four. So
they got that many multi-classes.
I don't know how they did it. Yeah, you could ask.
Okay,
it's what's his name from it's Rob. It's Rob.
Yeah, maybe. Did you give him free archetype, or did he just take a million multi-classes anyway?
Multi-classes.
That's
Rob from No Direction, so you can ask.
Yeah, sure. But wizards don't get all four traditions. True. They only get arcane.
Not only does he get all four traditions, but he has been trained in every single skill.
Oh, well, he's gonna be so happy in the remaster when he only he gets one spell proficiency because he will not have to use his crappy proficiency in the other three traditions anymore for his quadracaster.
I know. Well, that's the thing, and all he does is eat everything. It's like I feed him to my crow. It's like
Math Guy Dave points out Primal Witch is much closer to Druid than Wizard, which I think is definitely true. It has the same number of spell slots as Druid. It has some interesting different abilities.
It was easier when there was Wizard and Cleric. And that's it. That's
when it was magic user and cleric.
I'm not going back that far, but that was it. You had wizard and you had cleric, and that was it. And if you wanted magic, you took one of those, and one was offense.
And if you didn't want magic, you probably still should take those two classes if you go back to the right edition.
Was it. And then they added sorcerer, and then they added witch, and then they added warlock, and they're adding all these like kineticists and all these other classes.
Remember in the day of player's option, skills and powers and spells and magic, when if you wanted melee, you would also play a cleric because trading out the trading out
Yeah.
all of the spheres of spells that clerics had gave you so many build points because it just unreasonably cost a lot, and then you had all of them, that you could be left with a cleric that had all of the fighters class features, all of the rogues class features, one school of magic from wizard of your choice, and one sphere of cleric spells of your choice. So, for example, these are not the best spells, but let's say you love blasting and healing. You could have healing, evocation, all the fighter abilities, and all the rogue abilities. Or they were thief back then, thief abilities. It was hilarious in the way that worked. Remember that, Stephen? Because then you could just always have priests, and they were just your cleric could be your only class. You'd be
Cleric
fine.
was great. Cleric can do everything. Like, yeah, that was the whole point. You'd be a cleric, and then like whatever you want to do, they can do. They were awesome. But my point is, it's just because so many things can now cast spells, you really have to do something to make them different.
And I think the remaster witch achieves that. I think the playstyle with your familiar is differentiating it significantly from other classes.
No, I agree.
Nobody else does it exactly that way. It was great design to differentiate it in that way. As the overall design thrust on Witch was like perfect for what they're going for in differentiation.
Yeah.
Like much as yes, we went into the details because we can go into the reads, and we think that's one of the value adds we have because we have people who can go into the reads on specific wording. But the overall thrust is brilliant and perfect to make Witch more differentiated. The original non-remastered Witch probably was less differentiated from Wizard and maybe Bard in some ways, like a weird Wizard Bard hybrid.
Yeah.
Well, this went 2.5 hours. I got
there we go,
my dogs.
and it was on topic, right? We didn't go into any weird non-related topic
because I didn't talk. That's why. I talk, I totally go off topic. But...
You stayed on topic for Rogue pretty well, though. I was very impressed.
Okay. I guess I'll take the backhanded compliment.
That was much nicer than what you said to me about my Windows 95 joke.
Because it wasn't a joke.
It was a piece of referential humor.
As I said,
there you go. Okay, Stephen, I'll take the backhanded negative statement.
Well, if you say something funny, I'll let you know. Until then,
fair enough.
I liked it.
Well,
I thought it was funny.
People in chat said they liked it, but they pointed out Windows 11 familiar would be sooner than the Windows 95 familiar, which is true. But the main thing is your Windows 9 familiar would just constantly be bugging you to go back to their patron to update to Windows 10 that allowed their patron to spy on you.
By the way, Ryan, I didn't drag us off topic. Mark did, because it's his joke.
It's true. I totally did.
So don't pull me into his madness. So tomorrow we have let's look at that schedule.
We've got Anto for the Wizard.
I'm very curious of all the people we're gonna talk to. These will be one of the most interesting because he has just started with Pathfinder and has become a convert. And so I'll be very curious to see what he has to say quite a bit. So, wait. Oh, was that a question? Nope, not a question. Oh, we'll stay that for another topic because people won't stop talking about the death and dying rules. That's all people are talking about endlessly. It's so annoying. I
don't think it's annoying because it matters to people.
No, it matters to people, but I'm just didn't the rules not even change, or is it people just found
they didn't change from what the design team intended it to be, and in many support products it was, and it mentioned in the sideways in the core rulebook originally. But most people were playing it the more lenient way.
Got it.
There was a Reddit poll that started by saying about a third of people played it the harsher way, a third played it the more lenient way but are now going to change, and a third played it the more lenient way and aren't going to change. But more people answered it, and it got even more skewed. So it's now more like a quarter to a fifth who played it the other way.
Just put regeneration on you, everyone. No one dies. It's really easy.
There you go.
That's all you need to do. Just get up high enough level. Our guys are so high level. They have The Ion Stones, they got every get out of jail free card. They can die 5, 6 different times before they actually drop. So they are very good at making sure they have lawyers on top of lawyers. They never die. This is my John group, as you can imagine. They're very good at that edge case scenario to make sure that they always have a way out. And they do this amazing thing. I'm going to tell you the secret of not dying. Are you ready? Are you ready, everyone? They actually run away. Unbelievable.
I mean, that can be good.
I know, unheard
Sometimes
of.
it's hard to escape if the monster's faster.
Unheard of. When they're like, oh, we're losing, run away, regroup, we'll come back
It's a smart
later.
play.
I know.
It's a smart play.
You're not going to win every fight. And in fact, if you win every fight easily or without a challenge, then it's probably not as, well, I wouldn't say a fun game, but they do it quite frequently. And in fact, that's what they did against that war swarm.
Yeah.
They ran away.
That's smart.
They came back. They killed it. They killed it with clubs.
They knew what they were doing.
they killed it pretty quickly, in fact.
The game I'm playing in, we recently ran away by accident at the beginning of the fight before taking any damage. Because it was actually the same thing I was talking about with baiting the enemy out of its room that had the hazard.
Oh.
We didn't know it had a hazard at first. We just kind of heard that a hazard or something showed up, and we just backed off a lot, figuring it would come after us.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't trying to run away. We just thought it'll come all the way out of this and attack us, but it didn't. It just stayed in the room. Yeah, so it turned out to be a retreat because of the fact that nothing followed us. And then we regrouped. We had a strategy discussion. We said, okay, it's not going to follow us. What are we going to do? Because we've usually been in a running fight where we retreat backwards, throwing difficult terrain up in front of us.
Yep.
And this thing's not going to leave the room. So we were like, okay, well, we'll try to attack it from the edge of the room.
Yeah,
and
that's exactly what happened with the Warsworn. They actually were in a tower. They left, and it didn't chase them. So they're like, close the door, and they closed the door and went like in another room. And they're like, all right, and they're like, should we go in? And they're like, it probably is treasure, but they're like, it's not worth it. Then then the funny thing is the same one appeared later the next day.
Oh.
It was the same one. And they're like, oh, damn it, we should have killed it. And that's actually exactly what happened. And they brought it with them. Like,
that's hilarious.
I was like, well, if you killed it, and it actually says in Adventure, if it's killed, it doesn't show up. I'm like, oh, you get to see it again. But it was worth it just for the, like, because they said the ground is rumbling. And they're like, oh, no. I'm like, yep. And then it appeared on the map. They're like, damn it. That alone, that's what makes TTRPG so much fun, is that having the recurring bad guys. Anyhow.
All right.
Maybe we'll have Jess on again. Maybe not. Probably.
Maybe, maybe never again.
Maybe never.
What a possibility.
Again. Maybe never again. Well, it is Jess's show, so she
I was about to say it's her own show. How can you say this,
to visit
Stephen?
us with her greatness.
Yeah,
we will all be honored. Until then,
and her Majesty Nadine Holiday of the Winter Court.
All right, Your Majesty, I bid you adieu, and your court jester, the Furby.
That's good, Stephen. You won't be charged with less Majesty for mistreating the Queen.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Is your Furby the court jester or just your pet?
Bartholomew is his own Furby.
So he's neither. He just is. He's your familiar? There you go. He's your familiar.
Yeah, probably.
There you go. All right. We'll be here again tomorrow and then Friday with Rules Lawyer.
With Rules Lawyer?
Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Bye.